You know, switch to the next slide, James. Good looking people. All right.
All right, I'll go ahead and get going.
Thanks.
So this is Scepter. Parth is our executive director. I'm the communications director. The two of us run Scepter, as well as Scepter Wellness Ketamine Center, which is in our Scepter office, where we provide ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which we'll be learning about next Monday night. And then we actually just got our very first intern, which is really exciting for us. Being in the field that we're in, sometimes it's hard to make inroads into educational spheres or things like that. And so it was really exciting when we established a relationship with the University of Utah about 3 months ago, and they feel that Scepter is a worthwhile company to be able to send students to be able to get course credit. So Sarah Cunningham is our intern right now. She'll be an intern throughout your entire program. And so if you get random emails from Sarah, she won't be too much part of the program. She does side projects assisting me. But if you do get a random email from a Sarah Cunningham, she is our intern. And so, yeah.
So I think this moment also, I think the history of Scepter, we can take a minute or two on that. This was the brainchild of a good friend of mine. He's a psychiatrist, Reed Robinson, and I last summer. Just, you know, we're newbies in the field. Both of us, in terms of research and interest, had spent years, you know, in the space. James as well, but he didn't join us till a little later. And we started envisioning a nonprofit to study psychedelics. So our threefold mission was to educate people around it, which included trainings and the conference that some of you went to. Harm reduction is also another part of that. And actually this training, the mainstay, you know, the fundamental belief and the vision is harm reduction through training and education and lifting everybody that participates into a safer space, or if they hold space for others, or preparing them for the next stage of their own training. So Scepter was born out of those ideas. And at the time, you know, everything was still, I mean, even a year and a half ago, there wasn't even 20% of the research that's going on now. And so I decided to call all the major researchers out of the blue. And they're very accessible. And what happened out of that was I spoke with Jim Fadiman, and if you don't know who that is, we'll introduce him in a little bit, but he's a rock star in the industry, and he has been studying psychedelics for his entire career. He's 82. He's part of the original wave in the 60s, started in Harvard, went to Stanford, and he is the father of microdosing. But I got him on the phone, and we spoke for 90 minutes, and he agreed to come up here for an hour-and-a-half lecture. And then we took that, Reed and I went to the Austin conference, the MAPS National Conference, and you know, we were talking to other researchers and professors, and they said, we want to be on the stage with Jim. And that turned into a 3-day conference for 800 people, and it was phenomenal. And James, what was Jim's quote? The biggest secret?
Oh, so he said at the very beginning of our Friday night conference, this was the very first thing out of his mouth when he went on. He said, the greatest miracle in the psychedelic space today is that there are so many of you interested in psychedelics here living in Utah.
In Salt Lake City, you know, and it was. And people walked into Friday and Saturday night relieved that they weren't alone. You know, there was a tribe built. And the reason I bring that up is because you are now part of a tribe. You are part of this group as well as Scepter. But this group, we will really work on helping you know each other and connect with each other and build trust and rely on each other in a really big way. And we've got some great offerings in that way. And in fact, sort of a brainchild that just kind of came up in the last week. I'm going to, is this now the right moment to talk about that? Because Sune and Ken are on, I think.
Yeah, the two of them are on. You can do it. Then they can introduce themselves. Then we'll introduce ourselves before we get to the guest lectures. Then.
Okay, so you all know that the requirement and what we put out is that Monday nights 6 to 9 is a didactic, and Thursday nights 7 to 8 is what's supposed to be a process group, and some of the time it will be, but a lot of the time we're carrying over some of the lectures and didactics into it, and you don't. In the last two groups, the group members haven't been able to interact in the way that we really envisioned and get to know each other and build tribe. And so we're adding an offering, and this is not mandatory. This is something that you can join, but it's going to be Thursday nights after the process group. It's going to start at 8:15 and go to 9:30. And it's very specifically for the students, about the students, led by students, as well as two group supervisors. James and I won't be on that night, and it will be all experiential. And it's going to be a great, great thing. So if you can join, we know we're throwing it in last minute. There's nothing mandatory about it, but essentially what we envision is integration circles, group supervision, a lot of interaction, and this is probably the right moment. So Ken Brenneman, who is an alumnus from our program, and Suna East, who's a local integration expert, they are on the call right now, and I'd like them to take a moment to introduce themselves and speak to what they envision.
Thanks, Parth. Nice to see you, James. Hello, next generation of Scepter students. I'm one of those students that just didn't quite leave, huh? I really got so much out of the program. And one of the things that just sort of happened synergistically, as Parth mentioned, was there was a small group of the fellow participants that felt really called to connect more frequently. And so the most convenient time was right after the Thursday evening process group. And it was quite organic, and it was quite powerful to see that there were different themes that came up. Some of them were around, there were a lot of local people in Salt Lake City. I'm actually in Oakland, but people that wanted to network locally, people that wanted to experience more integration about their personal experiences with psychedelics, but also people that wanted to brainstorm and dream about what their future might look like, interfacing with the evolving field of psychedelic science. So I was invited back in to hold space with that idea of continuing that. And we still haven't formulated the official name for it, but I'm thinking of it as a peer-led supportive space for us to make meaning out of what you're learning, make sense out of why you joined the Scepter and where you want to take your journey after Scepter. So I'm very excited to be able to hold space and co-facilitate with Suni.
Yeah. And the vision, I mean, to mention that, and Suni's going to, I think, cover this too, is for you to have experiences to integrate maybe past experiences, as well as give you new opportunities to push the therapy modalities forward too. Suni?
I'm really excited to meet you all through this platform. My name is Sune, and I'm a local to Salt Lake. I've been here for a while, and one of the things that I'm involved in now is doing integration groups regularly for those who participate in psychedelic substances in different formats. So one of the reasons that I'm involved in this is to offer integration services to this group, and also to be of support to Ken with his experience in holding space for this group to really have a bonding experience and have the opportunity to get to know each other at a deeper level than has been made possible in the past, perhaps. So I'm really looking forward to holding space for the group and to learning from you all. And I'm grateful to be included. Thank you.
Thank you. So like we said, it's really brand new. We started talking about it this weekend. It's an additional offering, and we hope that as many of you can participate as possible. Ken and Sune are just on for that tonight, and I think we'll push forward with the other introductions.
Yep. Yeah, so before we get to the introductions of us and the rest of the guest lectures, you'll go first, Parth. I did want to say the reason that we're doing this was throughout the program we asked for candid feedback My background is in data analytics, and the easiest way to be able to find out how you're really doing is by asking sincere questions, whether they're tough questions, and getting that data back and compiling the data and figuring out what you can do better with next time. And one of the things that we did in our very final process group just a couple weeks ago was to ask what could have made the program even better. And between the 3 straight hours on Monday, an hour on Thursday, the fact that we're asking you to read a book, or at least some of that book, 5 of the 8 weeks. We have a few assignments. Some of the guest lecturers have readings or YouTube videos they want you to watch before class. Our first 2 programs, we worried about that we were being too overwhelming and that we were requiring too much time, too much effort, too much reading, too much everything. And what we actually ended up finding at the end of the program was the opposite. That most of the students, their feedback the very last day was, we wish we could have done more. We wish there was more time. We wish instead of doing a process group, 6 to 8 weeks on Thursday for an hour, we'd like it to go an hour and a half or 2 hours. And that's kind of the reason why Ken, without any direction from me or Parth, started doing this extended process group after me and Parth jumped off, was to fill that need because people felt like they wanted more, even more out of the program. So we're very excited to have the 2 of them that are going to run this, and hopefully that will add to feelings of cohesiveness and your ability to be able to work through things on a peer-to-peer level. All right, so next we will do the introductions 1 week at a time over the next 8 weeks of all the lecturers. Parth and I lecture in the first week, and then after that, outside of process groups, we mostly hand it over to experts in their particular area in the field of psychedelics. So Parth, go ahead and get started on yourself.
Awesome, thank you. So my name is Parth, and you guys probably read a little bit about me on the website. I hail from Michigan. I was born and raised there. My parents are Indian, obviously, last name Gandhi. And I, started at University of Michigan and transferred to BYU, finished graduate school there, a master's and PhD there, and then, was aching for more punishment. So I started business school there and then went to Manhattan and studied at Columbia and moved all together into leadership growth and development. And all of that kind of led me back to Utah after a few years, and started doing work as a clinical neuropsychologist, which is a lot of therapy, a lot of assessment, sort of understanding problems. And as a lot of clinicians that are in this field found that it was very frustrating. There's not a lot of movement with traditional therapies, with medicines. And over the last, probably 5 years, I discovered, I think the recent phenomenon of psychedelics has been going. It really started back up at Johns Hopkins around 2000 and really blooming over 10 years, and then extremely advanced over, like, let's say 2 or 3 or 4 years with the advent of more and more research centers. Michael Pollan's book was a big part of that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I came into it pretty organically, really wanting to find answers for myself, find healing for myself. And then, as I said, a couple of years ago, Reed and I met, and it was instant synergy, and became best friends, and started this nonprofit that has done, I think brought a lot of information and training, and now research. My research interests are in the cognitive aspects of psychedelics, obviously treating addiction, depression, because there's so much of it. It's so prevalent. Trauma is so prevalent. And so we have a ketamine clinic in Mill Creek. We're collecting data there. I am very, very excited about psilocybin and what the power there, not just in treating depression addiction, but cognitive enhancement and the changes that can happen, say, in autism and concussion. And we're going to have lots of opportunity to talk about that. Weeks 4 and 5, I think Adam Bramlage comes in. There's going to be a lot of opportunity to talk about that and get the word out, I guess. So that's a quick snippet on me. James.
So my name is James. I grew up around the world. I moved to Salt Lake City in March. It's the 26th city that I've lived in. My background, I went to BYU, just like Parth did. I studied Latin American studies, double majored in Spanish and Portuguese, and then did a double minor in international business and management. I left school and was a data analyst, working for a Wall Street bank for 3 years. I left and moved to Austin to go to business school. I went to the Macomb School of Business and I studied innovation and technology. After that, I was part of a company that was a nonprofit. It was an app related to political awareness, instructions on how to vote, why to vote, everything related to the political sphere. I wish we would have moved forward with it. We did it for about 1.5 years, and being in the political sphere was pretty. If you're struggling a little bit with feeling like humanity's a little bit lost, don't get into politics, because you quickly realize that we're probably more lost than we even realize we are. So I left that space, and I got hired on as a director of analytics for the Kraft Heinz organization. Lived in Pittsburgh for 1 year, and then we bought Kraft and moved to Chicago for 1 year. I was the head of market share analysis globally and the head of global revenue management. So a lot of things that just have to do with being able to present internal data to the C-suite, work on projects with the C-suite, and be able to understand data. That's been most of my professional career, but a couple weeks after I graduated from business school, this was about 8 years ago, I had my first psychedelic experience, and like almost everyone, especially your first experience, your mind is just absolutely blown. And I had already approached the world as trying to be a type of Renaissance man. I was never very interested in knowing every single in and out of of one specific thing. I wanted to know a lot about a lot of things. So I read a lot. I read, a handful of books a week, and have been doing that for the last 10 years. And I had my first psychedelic experience, and all of a sudden, collecting data and working with a C-suite and doing all of this stuff for these major corporations didn't feel so meaningful. And so I kind of brought on this new side persona of James Evans, the person that is obsessively excited about neuroscience, cognitive science, psychedelics, metaphysics, physics. And I just basically began my study into psychedelics by, I finished my experience and I went, oh, wow, I clearly do not understand this world or this reality that I live in. I need to understand it better. And so in the last 7 or 8 years, I've read over 1,000 books on every possible tangential topic that would get, that would help me better understand cognition and the psychedelic experience. And I had met Parth about 10 years ago. I went through a faith change and went through a divorce because of that faith change. And I actually saw Parth. He was my therapist for an entire year on a weekly basis. And so we kind of, we got along well, and we stayed in touch after I moved away. Every few months we would talk to each other. I was too afraid to bring up psychedelics to him, even though he was a neuropsychologist, and I wanted to pick his brain just because of the stigma. And so I was going to wait till he ever brought it up. And after years and years, I thought, well, he's never going to bring it up. I guess I'm never going to be able to share this with him. And then about 3 years ago, he called me and he said, I'm going to ask a weird question. Do you know anything about psychedelics? And I was just like, the shackles came off, and I was so excited after so many years, probably 6 or 7 years, where we could actually talk about things. And he flew to Denver, and we just brainstormed all weekend long on businesses that we could start in the psychedelic sphere, to bring more meaning to our professional pursuits in life. And we came up with a lot of ideas and had a good time. And then about a year later, he called me and he says, I've got it. I just started this company. I want you to be a part of it. So I joined Scepter very, shortly after Parth and Reed founded it, helped run the conference. And then as far as what I do for Scepter right now, I kind of run the business and I run the training program. So most of our correspondences are going to be between me and you. Homework assignments, just general questions. So anyway, that is me in a nutshell. And now we are going to get into our other lectures. Do you want me to just keep doing these, Parth?
Yeah, that's fine. And thank you for letting us embellish. We want to take the opportunity today for you to get to know us personally. We are going to actually ask each of you to do an introduction. It's going to be much briefer because of time restraints tonight. But on Thursday night, Ken and Sune are going to, that group is going to, the first one is going to be much more about getting to know each other, getting to know your tribe. So thank you for allowing us to be known.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So before I get into these guest lecturers, I just want to share how when Scepter first envisioned this training program, the training program was going to be brought to you by me, Parth, and Reed, and we were going to be the lecturers for all of these. And when COVID hit, and we realized we weren't going to be able to do it in person, we decided to switch to Zoom. We were very apprehensive about it. We really enjoy interpersonal contact, and establishing relationships in person obviously is just easier. But one of the great things that has come out of it is we, over the last 2 programs, over the last 6 months, we've been able to get absolutely fantastic lecturers. Just every single one of our guest lecturers is better than me and Parth at lecturing. And so having initially envisioned it of, the 3 of us were going to do everything, and now we bring in worldwide experts, people whose books that you've probably read or names that you already recognize. They come on, it's very personal. It's not like a lecture and a Q&A at the end. There's questions throughout. They usually share their contact information so you can contact them if you have any questions or further follow-up, which is just really neat. I think of if this were in some other sphere and I was taking some class on basketball and thinking that LeBron James would come on and give me his email and his phone number and say, call me if you have any questions about something I talked about tonight, it would be like, how is this happening? This is amazing. And so luckily in this small space, we have people that are passionate about this enough to where they're very, very accessible, which is, I think, pretty unique to this field. So I just want to start it off with that. One of the main strengths of this program is the level of people that we bring on. So week 2 is ketamine and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. Dr. Palios is going to be speaking to us almost the entire time. Most of our classes have 2 guest lecturers. Our MDMA-assisted psychotherapy and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy classes, it's 1 expert that is talking us through and answering questions the entire class. So this is a little bit about Casey. Casey is an MD. He's a psychiatrist and researcher out of New York City. He has over a decade of experience in the use of psychedelic medicines for the treatment of mental health. He was a study therapist in the landmark psilocybin cancer anxiety study at NYU, which was big. After doing that, Dr. Palios, oh, by the way, I think I just saw the first comment. It's too hard for me to track everything that's going on. So if anybody has a comment that you would like to make, just interrupt me for whatever reason, now and when we get to the lectures. Let me go back to Casey.
Don't be afraid to show your faces. There's a lot of people with their video off. We really want you to be seen too.
Thank you, Far. Since that landmark study he did on cancer anxiety, he served as the co-principal investigator in the NYU Bellevue ketamine depression study. And he is the scientific director at MindBloom. MindBloom is a really, really cool ketamine-assisted psychotherapy company that has beautiful space, and they are across the country and continuing to build. So he's kind of the head of their head of science over there, which is very exciting. And like I said, he'll be coming on in week 2 to talk about ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and the neuroscience of ketamine, since it's a very unique psychedelic-ish drug. In week 3, we have Sarah Gale. Sarah Gale is fantastic. She was a speaker at our conference and has been a speaker at all of our training programs. She is the head of Zendo. If those of you that are not familiar with Zendo, the Zendo project is a project to have better harm reduction strategies for people that are holding space for people. They have a big tent at Burning Man where people that are having a difficult internal experience can go and feel heard and be protected and feel safe. So she'll be on week 3. She'll discuss harm reduction for about 90 minutes. She's been a part of MAPS clinical trials related to MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. And she is actually just now transitioning out of her role as the director of harm reduction at the Zendo project. She'll be on in week 3 to tell us a little bit about what she's doing now. I believe she's going into private consulting. Did you have something that you wanted to say, Par?
No, just, I mean, she's a rock star in that, you know, she was a director at MAPS. She's a really big deal. And it was an interesting thing. So she and her husband led the Zendo project training in Salt Lake City. And it was their largest training outside of MAPS in California. There was, you know, I mean, 150 people there. And so, but she's a great ad. The 90-minute training that she does obviously isn't the full, like, 2-day experience, or I guess 9-hour experience of Zendo project, but it is definitely a good thing. And the book, I think it's actually listed, right? The harm reduction book is something you should get. So if you ever hold space for anybody and preparing yourself, one of the biggest things that, you know, that we're going to present on and talk about over and over is harm reduction and being prepared for that moment that you don't expect. So go ahead.
Thank you, Carl. Also in week 3 is another Sarah. Sarah has presented in both of our previous programs. Sarah works at MAPS. She graduated from CIIS, which is outside of MAPS. So, you know, those are the 2 biggest training programs. They are multi-month, or one of them is nearly a year long. They are big programs. She works for MAPS, and she helped develop the ethics plan for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. It doesn't, while that was specific to MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, that document is kind of more or less seen as the ethics of psychedelics and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy in general. She's really good. She's also a filmmaker. She's a really fascinating person. She'll be on and follow Sarah Gale for the final hour of week 3. So week 4, so we're incredibly excited about this. So week 4 is on shamanic practices, how to prepare for a psychedelic experience, how to integrate it after the fact. We talk about psychedelic retreats, both with ayahuasca as well as psilocybin. And Bia Labate is one of the biggest people in all of the psychedelic world. This is the first time she is coming to present to us. We're incredibly excited. She's written, I think, 19 different books. And she is the founder and director of Chacruna, which is one of the 5 probably most influential and important psychedelic organizations in the world. So she's going to come on and speak to us the first hour and a half. No, the first 2 hours. Yeah, sorry, the first 2 hours in week 4. We're very excited. We're very excited to land her. She was a big fish, and I'm sure her presentation is going to be fantastic.
And to specific to that, so yeah, she's going to be speaking about ayahuasca and ceremonial shamanism. So.
Week 4, following Bia, is Lynn. Lynn is actually a member of the Scepter Board of Advisors. She has been with us from the very beginning, and she's going to talk to us about psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, how to set intention, how to create optimal set and setting. We'll learn more about her that week, but Lynn facilitates underground psilocybin journeys, has been for many decades. And so a lot of what her lecture is just a Q&A. There's just so many fascinating questions to ask her. She's an absolute rock star. And she's one of the guest lecturers that our students most often get in touch with or end up having lunch with or a ceremony with or whatever it might be. So that's Lynn. She's fantastic. Also in week 4, we're going to bring on Dimitri. It's not going to be on a mandatory Monday or Thursday, but because we have Bia on, we had to relieve 3 people of lecturing that we want to introduce you to. we want to connect you with, especially if you're in the Salt Lake City area. Dimitri Vallejos is from Colombia and has studied the psychedelic practice for a long time in a traditional shamanistic setting. He is the head and director of Decriminalize Salt Lake City. And so we want to connect you with him so that he can tell you about what they're working on at Decriminalize Salt Lake City, and possibly so that you can get involved if you feel like anything that they're working on is something that you'd like to be associated with. John was in our very first program. John's an entrepreneur, and he's a longtime devotee to plant medicine. He runs an ayahuasca retreat in Colorado. And so we're going to bring him on as well. When I figure out the date for him to come on with Dimitri, I'll let you know. But we just want to introduce you to him and hear how, a retreat is run and why it's run the way that they run it, how long they've been running it. It's part of a Native American church. And so anyway, it's a really interesting to hear about how they run these semi-underground, semi-above ground retreats. So that's John. And Marie is John is the president of that Native American church. Marie Luna is the guide. And so she'd come on with John and kind of describe about, everything that they do in their retreat in Colorado. All right, week five is really fun. In week 5, we dive into altered states that don't come from the consumption of psychedelics, but come from alternative modalities. So that can be breathing exercise, it could be meditation, it could be a religious spiritual experience, it could be a near-death experience, it could be through holotropic breath work, it could be a number of different modalities can lead to very similar, and from a neurological perspective, nearly identical experience as the psychedelic experience. So Stasia Butterfield presents for about an hour and 15 minutes on holotropic breath work. Stanislav Grof, who had administered more LSD-assisted psychotherapy sessions in Europe and the United States before they went illegal than probably anyone else. And that's still to this day true. He is still alive. Once in 1970, when psychedelics went illegal and even researchers couldn't study them any longer, he turned to holotropic breath work, which is a way of different breathing exercises and an underlying psychology in the foundations of transpersonal psychology that allows for altered states just through these breathing exercises. She was taught directly from Stan Grof, which is exciting. And she's one of the big players in this space. She was a speaker at our conference, and she's fabulous as well. So we're excited to bring her on. She's also done work with MAPS. Adam Bramlage, met him at our conference last year, actually. Adam is a specialist in flow state. The flow state is an altered state that many of you have probably experienced. Probably all of you have experienced, even though only some of you have recognized that you're experiencing it when you did experience it. But he's going to come on and talk about flow states and talk about microdosing psilocybin. Adam works with professional athletes in the NFL and the NHL as a personal coach, and works with them on microdosing regimens and having their lives, both personally and professionally, improved by using low dose psilocybin. Week 6, we really dive into therapy. There are certain therapeutic modalities that are more amenable to the psychedelic experience. The typical, if you go see a therapist, the typical modality that's used is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Cognitive behavioral therapy and the other type of therapies that are similar have a lot to do with back and forth talk. It's, typically talk therapy is what they call it. But that doesn't work very well with psychedelics. The idea within psychedelic therapy is that the psychedelics interact with an inner healer that we have inside. And if you let the psychedelic take hold of the patient, we want instead of the therapist guiding the therapy session, you're really just listening and allowing what needs to come up. And so she comes on and talks about compassionate inquiry, CI, internal family systems, IFS, and EFFT, emotion-focused family therapy. Those are three therapeutic modalities that go very well with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. So she comes on in week 6 and introduces us to these different modalities. And then she actually runs the process group that Thursday to actually run us through an exercise or an activity based on internal family systems. All right, week 6. Paul Uwe is one of my favorite people in the entire world. He has been a speaker now for us in both of our programs. He spoke once in the first program, and he was so amazing. And as I'm personally listening in, I remember I was texting another psychiatrist that put us in touch with this guy, and I was going, oh my gosh, this guy is a rock star. And so between how I felt about it, Parth felt about it, and then the great feedback we got from the students, we brought him back last program, and he taught 3 times. He'll be teaching us twice this program. He is a psychiatrist, works in Toronto, Canada. He has been involved in the Zendo project and MAPS. He was part of the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy trial. And he actually just shared this with me when I had a Zoom with him for about an hour a couple days ago. And he shared with me that he had actually met Sarah Sheld, who speaks to us on ethics. And they had actually worked together on writing that ethics paper, which I thought was an interesting crossover, which is fun. And then week 7, Jim Fadiman. Jim Fadiman was what kind of put us on the board. He's known as the father of psychedelics. He did his undergrad at Harvard and was very close friends with Ram Dass, Richard Albert. He did his master's degree and PhD at Stanford in 62 and 65. And shortly thereafter, along with Stanislav Grof and 2 other people, they built this new psychological framework called transpersonal psychology. That university is now Sophia University. Jim comes on and basically does a Q&A with all of us on microdosing for about an hour and a half. He also will be speaking to us about both of his books. One of his books just recently came out in the last couple months called The Symphony of Selves, which is a fantastic book, really great for integration, and also goes very well with IFS and CI and EFT in it being a modality that fits very well around the psychedelic experience. We're super excited to have Jim on. He's a humble genius, and he's really jovial and just a really great guy. Also that week, and it's following Jim Fadiman, that Monday, we have Bennett Zellner on. Bennett Zellner is a PhD economist. He got his PhD from Berkeley, and he now teaches at the University of Maryland, I believe. He came on a program last program for the very first time, and he presents something that's really interesting, really outside of the bounds of what you're normally thinking about in the world of psychedelics, but he is kind of the foremost person leading the way in coming up with new economic models for the psychedelic healthcare movement that we are about to see. So it's very, very interesting discussion on politics and economics and philosophy. It's really, really, really fascinating. And then our last lecture in week 8. Oh, looks like that is incorrect. That's my mistake. But Ingmar Gorman.
I can.
Okay, yeah, go for it if you want to do it.
Yeah, so Ingmar Gorman is a PhD psychologist. He has his own company called Fluence 8, and they run training programs. He is a principal investigator in an MDMA study at, I think, NYU. So he's a guy that I met through conferencing. He actually runs, he's got two partners, but he runs the oldest psychedelic conference, national conference called Horizons. It's based in New York City. So he's a founder and participant in that. Really, really good guy. And I don't know if that's right. Ingmar Gorman, I think, is a PhD, not an MD. We'll double check on that. Just a beautiful soul. And I want to kind of add that so many of these people, so accessible, so beautiful. And what you'll find over and over is people that are doing their own work, you know, and the beauty shines forth in the way they lecture, in the way they teach and share very generously. And so, as James said, we're so excited. Ingmar is a new ad. Bia, I think confirmed last week, and it's been a hard get. I've been hounding her since the conference, actually, like 7 months. And she finally agreed, and we're so excited about the lineup. And now it's your turn. We're going to turn it into the student introductions. And this is just, again, kind of a quick thing tonight. You'll have a greater opportunity later. But what we'd like you to do is, just for tonight, just say your name, where you're zooming in from, where you're located, and then just maybe a couple thoughts, less than 2 minutes, about what you're most excited about in this program. Like, what brought you here? What are you excited about? We're just going to go alphabetically, first name. So I think we're going to start with Adam. So if you want to unmute yourself and then chime in, and hopefully you've got video. Is Adam on with us?
Adam Canton. It's so nice to finally put a face with all these names. I feel like I've corresponded with all of you throughout thousands of emails, and now I finally see who you are.
Oh, so Adam Canton. I guess we're starting with Adam Canton. Is Adam Canton on?
Looks like maybe Adam is not on, so we'll loop back to him.
Okay, Adam, am I saying Zama right?
It's Adam Sharma.
Sharma. Sorry about that.
Yes. No, it's okay. It's okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Adam.
Okay, so I'm calling in from Eswatini, used to be called Swaziland, in Southern Africa. And what else did you say? What am I most excited about from this program?
Why take the program, Adam? We've talked about it in our emails a million times. Just kind of share what you're trying to do.
Yes. So I coming from a background of physics originally, and permaculture, it's kind of sustainable agriculture, but also personal psychedelic work, which I was using for my own healing, and I've recently been getting much more into the therapeutic aspect, and researching a lot and reading a lot of books and finding great healing in that. And my ultimate vision is to create a center and a healing space with using permaculture and growing psychedelics, growing plant-based psychedelics, and demonstrating them as tools for healing, and also permaculture and food as medicine and ethnobotany. So yeah, to integrate all of that. So I'm super grateful to be online and to be in this course. And thank you for your time. And looking forward to meet you all.
And yeah, and welcome. It's the middle of the night in Africa, and we're super excited to have you.
Adam's logging in from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. on Mondays and 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. on Thursdays.
Yeah, this is a trip on its own, to be honest.
Well, we're extremely excited to have you, Adam. Thank you.
Angela.
About Angela. I think still mute.
Okay, there we go. Am I there?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Angela, and I am on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. I am a registered midwife, a holistic nutritionist, a yoga teacher, and probably the last 6 years, I've been working in shamanic studies. And I've done psychedelic journeying for my own personal work. And now I'm interested in helping others work out their stuff in a safe space. So harm reduction and just connecting with other people and just learning more. I just want more. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm excited. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Let's see, Angelique.
Hello, I'm attending from Park City, Utah. I am a therapist in private practice, and I do trauma recovery work, attachment work, and I'm trained in EMDR and IFS. And my interest in psychedelics was primarily on the sidelines in terms of watching the research unfold with promise for work in addiction and recovery. And then I attended the conference in January, and I was just blown away, mainly by what my nervous system felt in the room was so welcoming and inspiring that I was just like, I want to be a part of that.
Fantastic. Well, we're glad you came. It was a whirlwind of excitement when we put that on.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna Whistler. I am in Logan, Utah, and I'm a group practice owner up here for mental health therapy. And we've recently partnered with Cash Ketamine, which is kind of the first local ketamine clinic in our area. And I was just so excited to see them come about that I immediately reached out to Colby Martin, the owner, and got in touch with him, and we've connected. And so it's kicked kind of my own journey into psychedelics, and then just using it to bring it back to my clinic and to our clients to see how we can best serve them.
Beautiful. Thank you, Anna. Ariana.
Hi, I'm Ariana. I'm from the East Coast, specifically in Richmond, Virginia, but I'm from DC. My first experience with Scepter was in January with Emma, who's actually on the call right now. I come from a psychology and addiction studies background, and right now I'm a behavior therapist, so I'm excited to be getting experience with live data collection. I'd like to eventually combine yoga, body psychotherapy, breath work, and psychedelic medicine to cultivate more holistic programs to help with like healing trauma and addictions. And I really love research, so I hope to execute studies eventually. And being a part of this program is really incredible. There's nothing like this where I live, so thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm so proud of us. I don't think there's something like this anywhere.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Atul?
Hey there. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name's Atul. I live in LA. I've been interested in psychedelics for probably 10 years now. Been following the science pretty closely. More recently, I've been showing some of my close friends their first trips, and I saw how an amazing experience it was for them additionally. So, and I realized the science is still new, but promising and helpful for different addictions and disorders. I really think psychedelics can be very therapeutic and could potentially make the world a better place, kind of cliche. Realized I don't have a PhD or MD, but I was hoping to push the field forward any way I can. So interested right now is kind of learning more, getting some training under my belt, and maybe becoming a coach or sitter or guide at some point in the future.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Atul. Mm-hmm. Blair.
Hello, I'm from Salt Lake City, and I'm a clinical mental health counselor, co-founder of Healing Pathways Therapy Center with my wife. My wife went to the conference, and so we're kind of splitting up. She got to go to the conference, and so I get to do this. But you know, we've been following the research. We really focus on helping our clients heal, not just deal. You know, with sorry, long day, and there's lots of squirrels running around in my brain. But yeah, like, you know, focusing more on trauma-informed care. We trained in EMDR and IFS, and you know, we like to try to remain on the cutting edge of what modalities are best going to help our clients and ourselves, not just cope, but deeply heal and be able to move forward and move on from the traumas in their lives. And so, you know, this seems like a very much kind of the next step in kind of keeping up with what are the best things to help the people that we're called to help. So yeah, I'm looking forward to learning how to do this work ethically in an informed, non, you know, we'll just see what happens kind of way, like actually know what the hell I'm doing when I try to do it. So.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Blair. All right, let's go top of the second one. Debbie, would you like to introduce yourself to us?
Hi, I'm Navajo Native American from Arizona. My son is living here in Salt Lake City, so I'm able to come out and stay with him to do some of his botany kind of things that he's doing. He's running a garden. So I'm originally, I guess, into community services. I've worked with Parents Anonymous of Arizona for about 14 years as a parent volunteer. I've also been with the community, the AmeriCorps program, and we took an oath that you are the power of one. Both my parents carry a fireplace with the Native American church, so I was raised on peyote. And I believe that all the Native American medicines are to be respected, to be prayed with. And I'm interested in to see where the laws regarding this whole community under a church will, you know, fit into all the modalities. And I am interested in being a sitter and possibly doing some work in clinics after hopefully I get certification. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie.
I think you'll really enjoy it. So John will talk about the church that he's talking. We will talk about some that are established here, but under Religious Freedoms Act, both in Utah and at the U.S. Supreme Court, you know, it's all sort of been legalized in a way, and so we'll talk about that. I think in 4 or 5.
I will in the history. Okay, brilliant. Who's up next? Emma?
Hi, I feel like a kid at Christmas. My name is Emma Ernest, and I am a social work major at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. My calling in life has been to help people heal, grow, and thrive. Psychedelics have offered me so much healing through my childhood trauma and through PTSD recovery. And I've manifested a lot of people in my life who didn't understand psychedelics and have been able to help them on safe journeys. And I have used every opportunity in my educational career to learn about psychedelics, to read about it, to educate people. And I'm hoping to start a psychedelic club on campus and be able to bring people on campus to talk about psychedelics, to educate my peers, but also to bring more awareness in the social work field. My goal eventually is to get my DSW, get my LCSWC, and then get my DSW, but eventually, like, my calling in life is to be a psychedelic therapist in some way, shape, or form. And I'm so honored and so grateful to be here. And Ari and I did go to the Scepter Symposium in January, and it blew our minds. It was like the best way to start 2020. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. We're excited.
And they were like, "Can you bring this to the East Coast? That'd be awesome one day."
Yeah, we appreciate both of your enthusiasm and excited you came out here.
We were online from the East Coast, so.
Yeah, well, we're sorry that 2020 started off so high for those of you that came to the conference, because it's more or less just been a crash since then. So at least we had something good in 2020 happen. Did Heather join us tonight? Heather, are you on? Heather is our first returning student. So Heather is a psychiatrist. She has her MD. She's a medical director at one of the hospitals here in the Salt Lake City area. She took our program last time with Ken, but had to miss a handful of classes. And so we're letting her take the program again. She is also donated. She was Scepter's first student to donate and give back, and she donated $1,000 towards 2 scholarships for students at the medical program at the University of Utah. So we love Heather. She's great. I'm sure she'll be on next time. Okay, who next? Isaiah, I mess this up every time. Is it East?
You are so good. It's Isai.
Thank you.
Hello, it's all good. So first off, I want to apologize that you guys can't see me. I've just been having a problem with my camera, but on Thursday, you will all be able to see my face. First off, I'm extremely grateful and honored to be a part of this class and to be accepted into this opportunity. A little bit about me. I come from a psychological, behavioral psychological background, graduated with my BS in behavioral science with an emphasis in psychology from UVU in 2017. Immediately graduating, I worked for a treatment center stationed in Draper for about 1.5 years with troubled teens. And then after that, I transferred over to an autistic company stationed in Salt Lake City, and I worked as a behavioral technician implementing very specific psychological programs and then gathering and collecting data on that. I have a huge desire to become a clinical and transpersonal psychotherapist. I have a huge desire to work for MAPS and Zendo, eventually being able to bridge the modalities of the scientific world with the shamanistic world, as we are seeing in this day and age that those two are more similar than we think, than they are separate. I'm also the founder and creator of Sacred Stasis. The work that I do now currently is I work with intuitive healing modalities. So I work with sound therapy, aromatherapy. I tap into the energetic body and work with that. I tap into some breath work. And yeah, my journey really is the desire to be able to teach the safety of psychedelics as I've sat myself with them, and they've changed my life in such a beautiful way. And being able to hold space for others is a part of the work that I desire and currently do. So thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to be a part of this. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. You also attended the conference. And then we met at Zendo. Did you do Zendo on Saturday too?
Yes, so I did attend the conference, which is absolutely outstanding. Thank you so much, Parth and James. Like, it was absolutely amazing. The turnout was outstanding. And then I also attended Zendo and got in touch with Sarah as well. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. We're glad you're here. Jesse, you're up next.
I am coming to you from just east of Seattle, a ferry right away in Bremerton. I'm coming to this from a lot of different perspectives. My goal is to learn everything that I can. I am facing a period of transition in my life, wondering if psychedelic is going to be my educational focus as I return to school. I have just recently, I'll probably continue to practice, but I won't be with the same company, where I was a mediator for 10 years. And there's just a lot of new stuff going on in my life, and I'm really excited to have this opportunity to explore with you guys. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jess. Karen.
Yeah, hi. Well, I am really excited to meet everyone. I was taking notes, and then I just decided to be 100% present. I really connected with what you just said, Jesse. I'm also at a period of evaluating what I want to do. And I currently am a research coordinator at the University of Utah at Huntsman. And I understand they have their first psilocybin study starting soon. And so I'm not sure if I'll remain in the research world or not. Actually, I would. I am interested in the clinical trials or assignment, and would like to do some research of my own. I don't have a therapist degree, so I'm very grateful that you opened up your program to people who are not clinicians and not therapists. It's unusual. Believe me, I've looked around. So thank you for that. And yeah, I just come to this from my own personal experience with psychedelics. I was a massage therapist for 10 years, worked with birthing women, where you can definitely have non-psychedelic induced birthing states. And I'm interested in the comparison between the experience, like the rebirthing experience during the psychedelic experience as well. So I'm interested in all of that and learning from all of you.
Thank you, Karen. We're excited to have you. Yeah, the birthing process was actually the first time I witnessed someone else having an altered state, and it kind of blew my mind. I'm divorced now, but when my wife was having our first baby, she wanted to do hypnobirthing. It sounded really kind of woo-woo and out there to me. I wasn't in that right place at that moment, and she wanted to do it, and so we practiced it really hard and then got in, and she literally went somewhere else with her mind. She never moaned, she never screamed, she never did anything, just like Zen Buddha straight through and done. And it just kind of blew my mind. That was like probably my first experience to being witness to someone having an altered state of consciousness entirely. Well, anyway, thank you. I think Christy's next.
Hi, I'm here in Lehi, Utah. I am a registered nurse. I work at Center for Change with Dr. Robinson. I've only met him. He doesn't know who I am. My boss, Michelle Rawls, is the one who told me about Scepter, and I've been fascinated ever since. They use ketamine there, and just watching the difference in some of those patients, watching real healing take place is so fascinating, so intriguing. I've got to be a part of this. This is just the coolest thing ever. Thank you so much for letting me be here.
Wow.
I hope to learn.
We know who our hype is in the program. I like it. Thank you, Chris. Love the enthusiasm. Thanks for sharing. Megan. This is a face actually you know.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about the lighting. I'm in a cabin in Colorado. Hopefully the internet's not spotty while I'm talking. So I live in Colorado. I came to the Scepter conference in January. I'm in school for transpersonal psychology at Sophia University. And I'm just looking to learn more and become a guide. I have a friend here in Colorado who's starting a ketamine center in the next couple of years. And so I'm just getting up and running, getting all the different trainings together so that I can become a guide as well. I'm part of John and Marie Luna's church here in Colorado. So I'm really excited to see them speak in week 4. And yeah, I've got about 10 years of experience under my belt with psychedelics and a little bit of guiding to friends and such. So I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. We're excited to have you. I actually, coincidentally, we had about 800 people at that conference that weekend, and it was split between a dinner Friday night, Jim Fadiman lecture Friday night, and then all day Saturday. And then Zendo was, I think, 8 or 9 hours on Sunday. And it just so happened that I sat down right next to Megan at the Jim Fadiman dinner, and we were chatting and getting to know each other a little bit. And then she emailed me, it was a Facebook message conversation just a few months ago. And we both kind of realized that we were talking to this person that we sat next to each other several months before. So it's nice to reconnect, and we're glad that we could have you, Megan.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay, let's see. I saw Mike join. Mike, would you like to give a little 2 or 3 minute intro? Oh, still on mute.
Okay, how's that?
That's better.
All right. So my name is Mike Gavoni, and I live in Sedona, Arizona, but I'm originally from Boston, as you may be able to hear in the accent as I talk. So I have a private practice supporting people who are in recovery from substance abuse to experience deeper healing and transformation. I currently studied under a naturopathic doctor in mind-body healing. And back home in Boston, I supported the 3 emergency rooms for the opiate epidemic. I know my field primarily deals with addiction, but as many of you know, psychedelics have this profound ability to work with, people who are addiction to support healing. And it's kind of interesting being in the field of recovery, but also open to psychedelic therapies and so forth. And it's kind of interesting because I'm met with this mixed baggage of people, and it's kind of been an elating feeling of stepping outside of that old framework. I got sober in a 12-step program. I've been sober off drugs and alcohol for 16 years. And, to get met with that, people don't understand so much. And I think it's a fascinating field. I had a profound shift in consciousness from an illness, almost a near-death experience. And that led me on a healing path, which included working with psychedelics. And that's why I'm very much interested to help support other people. I'm not so sure exactly where I'll land in all of this quite yet, but I really wanted to be here and participate in this. And one main reason for that is my clients who I'm working with and a lot of other people are ending up in medicine circles, and half of the medicine circles are filled with people who are in recovery. And I find that fascinating as we move in the direction of legalizing psychedelics, possibly in the near future. So it's really an exciting time, and I'm excited to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. We're glad you could join. Natalie.
Hello, can you hear me okay? It's kind of loud. I'm out in my backyard. I'm in my backyard in Highland, Utah. So me and Christy are neighbors. She's in Lehigh. We're pretty much neighbors. So I was introduced to psychedelics about 3 years ago, kind of by accident. I'd been researching it a little bit, but I had no idea what I was in for as far as the transformation it would have on me and my life. And since then, I'm not in the field at all as far as therapy goes, therapist, but I have been doing my own research and education. And most recently, my job has been not fulfilling at all. And I wasn't able to go to the conference because I work on Saturdays. I sell houses for builders, it's a very strict schedule. But I just really have been feeling called to see if I can position myself in a place to do more meaningful life purpose. So a couple of nights ago, after I'd done research on other programs, I found this program and I applied yesterday. And I'm so excited to be here. You guys are all speaking my language, and I'm so excited to learn and just soak it all up and see if I can help move this work forward, and help others along the way. Thanks. I'm so excited.
We're glad you're excited, Natalie.
Thank you.
Nick.
Hi. The way my name appears on the screen is all scrambled. It's my middle name and my last name together. But can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, all right. So yes, it's Nick. I am originally from Romania. I am in Pennsylvania at the moment in my van. Next time I'll be in Chicago, and after that in Colorado. So I'm all over the place. I'm a chef by profession. I've been in the US for 22 years. I got a degree in culinary and then a degree in nutrition. And then I discovered psychedelics. In my 40s, I dipped my toes in that river, and what I found was amazing. And I took a complete change in my career. I no longer want to put my hours behind, in a kitchen or behind a desk. So I took now to the road, and I'm discovering my second half of my life. And with psychedelics, I think it's looking good. So I want to learn more along the way with this class, and see where it takes me, see where the road takes me, what I can do with it. Make my own ripples in some way, some waves to just push it forward, push this movement forward to help others. Pretty much it's what it is. Yeah. And then we'll see I will see where it takes me. But it looks very good, and I'm very happy to do this.
Perfect. Well, we're glad you're finally joining. Nick.
Yeah.
Nick and I have been in conversations for about 4 months now about joining the program.
Yes, yes. I backed out for a minute. I had to pause for a minute because I wasn't prepared for. It's the first time I'm using this, using Zoom and using this format of a class, only the old-fashioned. So I was a little bit scared, but no, I'm not scared anymore. It looks good.
Oh, great! Thank
Yeah.
you much, Nick. Olivia, Liv.
Hi, my name's Liv. It's written as Olivia, but I go by Liv. Right now, I'm on the path to become a therapist, and I'm going to take training to be trained in Hakomi, and I would really like to facilitate psychedelic journeys as well. I've been using psychedelics for my own healing and exploration for the last 10 years, and I'm so psyched about the psychedelic renaissance, and that I found this program, and it's something I would like to do in my practice in the future. And in this program, I'm really excited to learn about pre and post integration sessions and different modalities that are used for that, and helping people during, but also before and after.
Wonderful.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Where are you from, Liv?
Oh, I'm in Portland, Oregon, and it's cool. We're like the pioneer city right now, where we have on our ballot this fall, we're voting to legalize psilocybin, and there's 2 therapists in the city that have been running that campaign, and it's their vision to have facilities open starting, I think, in 2021, hopefully if it passes, to start using psilocybin-assisted therapy therapeutically. So that is cool, and I hope to be on board and be involved with that in some way.
Yeah, that's very exciting what Oregon is doing. A bunch of cities have gone through the process of decriminalization or legalization, most recently in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a couple weeks ago. What Oregon is trying to do is getting it on the ballot to vote for it to be statewide instead of just a city. So they'd be the first state to do it, kind of pioneering, just like Denver did for the city of Denver about 1.5 years ago. So that's exciting. Hopefully it passes. Thanks.
Yeah, it is on our ballot. So yeah, we're voting.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Samuel.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Sam.
Okay. Hi, I'm coming from Salt Lake City. I work as a nurse here, but I'm actually from Bay Area. I grew up super alternative in Berkeley, California. My dad was a acquaintance of Timothy Leary and Ram Dass and all of these people. And so psychedelics have been a part of my life, whether I liked it or not, basically my whole life. I then went to University of California, Santa Cruz. I studied philosophy and history of consciousness there. I became a high altitude mountaineering guide, and alpine climbing is still really, really huge part of my life. I coach at a gym in Salt Lake City. I work with some other really hardcore climbers, and actually a client partner, a physician friend of mine, Dean Tanner, was a Scepter student in the last group, and he said, you should check this out. And I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, so I thought this might be a really interesting opportunity to see who else is out there and what they're doing. So I'm really excited to learn from all of you. I also teach wilderness first responder courses for Wilderness Medicine Utah, which is sort of branched from the University of Utah.
Thanks. Awesome. Thank you, Sam. We're excited that Dean told you about us. All right. Sarah.
Buddy, I'm Sarah. I am in Spokane, Washington, and I am originally from Canada, but I've been in the States now pretty much for 12 years or so. I am a former nurse. I currently work at a homeless shelter, actually a COVID-19 homeless shelter here. And I've just been at this job for about a month now. And previous to that, I was living in Oakland, partly to kind of meet other people, see what's going on as far as decriminalization and integration. It's a sort of psychedelic center. So I spent about a year down there and then came back after COVID to this part of the world where I have some family. And I am doing this job at the shelter, and I've been excited about psychedelics for a long time. I had my own awakening experiences, I think via mostly psilocybin primarily, and that sort of transformed my life and helped me through a really dark place that I was in, deep depression that was even suicidal ideation at times. And that really just totally took me out of that place, my psychedelic experiences, and just made me have a lot of realizations about my life and what I really would like to do and what my natural gifts are and what the future could hold. And in particular regarding psychedelic therapy, but also just healing on an individual level, and then that obviously ripples out to the collective. So so I'm just really, really excited to meet everybody and get to know people, and I know I have so much to learn, so I'm excited about it.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Tara.
Did I do it?
There you go.
Okay, technology. So first of all, I have to say hi to those of you that I met at the conference. So fun to see you. I'll be reaching out. Also, I'm in Salt Lake. Gotta remember all the things. I'm a LCSW therapist. I do mostly trauma work, EMDR. I've done a lot in addiction. I have come into this arena because I am a therapist that is I feel like a constant search for better tools. I find it really, really difficult to sometimes feel like my hands are tied and know what is out there and see my patient or my clients who are very stuck. And I have gotten very increasingly more anxious and excited for being able to use these tools over the last, I guess I've been following the research for 10-ish years now, partly because I had a brother with drug addictions and lost him. And so between that, knowing that there were better tools for him that he could have had, and also for my own clients, just knowing there are better tools, I'm pretty determined to be in this in any way that I can. I actually love research. I would love to be involved in research, but I also love just working with my clients. I love my work, but I also feel like there are better tools I want to be able to use. So in the meantime, I'm actually running wellness retreats. I'll tell you more if you ask, but that's all I'll say. I've been doing that for about 1.5 years now with a partner who I don't think is here yet, but his name is Adam. He'll be in this group also. And I've been organizing community discussion groups. So if anybody's in the Salt Lake area and you want to participate in that, they've been really amazing so far. It's so awesome to have a sense of community around this and with people coming from different areas. So actually I'm planning on getting James and Parth to the next one. So gotta keep talking about this stuff. I think that's about all. I feel like I'm taking too much time, but I'm stoked. This is great.
Wonderful. Well, we're excited that you're here with us.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary.
I don't think Adam, you haven't joined yet, have you? No, I don't think you've joined yet.
He texted me earlier and said something weird came up. I'm not sure what.
All right. Well, if he joins later on, even when I'm lecturing, we can get him to do an intro. So let's see, Terry.
Hi, my name is Terry. I live in Salt Lake. I am from the Bay Area, but I'm currently in Kansas, which is for a wedding. So it's a little odd. Like everyone else, or not everyone else, but I'm really excited and kind of nervous, to be honest with you. In addition, I am a nurse. I'm a mental health, women's health nurse, and I work more specifically with sexual assault victims. And so I have a wide range of things I do as far as a nurse. I come to this, believe it or not, through the community I belong to in California that has done a lot of the research and projected and been parts of MAPS and Zendo and all of that. And been very fortunate to see it firsthand along with my own experiences. And to be honest with you, that's how I'm a nurse. So it all comes and ties together at some point in your life. And right now it is. Fortunate that I have friends at the CIS program who've been trying to get me to go to that program. So I'm excited for this program instead. It's closer. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Terry.
Terry, just to clarify, are you an advanced practice nurse?
No, that's actually my next step. I'm applying for school in fall, so we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Trisha.
Hi, my name's Trisha. I'm from Ogden, Utah. I just barely heard about your program, I think mid last week. My very best friend, Hannah Cross, went through your program last time. And we were in conversation last week and she had mentioned the program and, you know, you really need to take this. And it was so exciting to me because she is a therapist and I am not a therapist. So making it accessible to me was huge. I just didn't think that that would be possible. So I thank you guys for opening that up. I don't know if that was something you've always done but that's really cool. I am a Reiki master teacher, a yoga instructor, and a warehouse distribution manager. So kind of a bunch of mixed stuff going on there. Like Mike, I really related to what you were saying. I have a recovery background. I did 10 solid years in a 12-step program, very strict, very diligent, sponsoring all of it. And I got to a point in my own recovery where just kind of hit a wall, and that's where psychedelic medicine found me. And it was a really beautiful experience. But there was a lot of judging myself and fear and wondering what was going to happen. And just the 12-step recovery really kind of pounds it in your head that like absolutely nothing, mind altering. So getting through that challenge was really cool. I am really interested in the harm reduction, gaining confidence in doing this kind of work because it definitely is a passion of something that I want to do and help others. Mixing it with what I already do and being able to mostly just have the confidence to sit with people. And so I just want to say thank you, and I'm excited for this new journey.
Wonderful. Thank you, Trisha. That Hannah mentioned us to you.
Yeah, thank you.
And then let's have Heather Curtis. Why don't you introduce yourself real quick after she gets done with some water. Oh.
Hi, guys.
There you go. Hi, Heather.
Hi. So I work as a medical director. I'm an attending psychiatrist at a inpatient behavioral health unit here in the Salt Lake City area. And I actually just was part of Scepter's last class, but having just bought my first home and serving as a medical director in a pandemic, I kind of missed a lot and I wanted to kind of re-immerse myself. I think you guys are in for a really beautiful ride and I'm excited to join you all and keep deepening my practice and learning with you all. I guess I kind of tangentially got started on this path through my own work doing acceptance and commitment therapy with my mentor, who is in his 80s now. He's Hindu and from India, and He got me started with ACT and mindfulness, and that bled into yoga and then different holistic practices, some of which we dip into this training, and then eventually to psychedelics. So I'm really excited to be here again and grateful to be back.
Perfect.
Well, thank you very much, Heather. All
So
right.
yeah, that was perfect. And thank you for holding space for one another. The biggest thing that I felt came out of the conference, and I think most people, I think the feedback was not just the discussion of medicines and the research, but that it felt like a tribe, you know, and I mean, I hope it doesn't sound hokey, but the medicine is a facilitator for love and connection. And you have the opportunity to hold space for one another. And so we knew this was going to take time, you know, getting to know each other and spending that time. But I think the interactions will be enhanced going forward in the next 8 weeks. And again, that Thursday night group after the process group is going to, I think, facilitate quite a lot of this as well. James, do you want to dig in, or do you want to take a 5-minute break?
We could take a 5-minute break. Everybody get up, use the bathroom, get a drink, stretch. Please be back on at 7:42. I'm going to start at 7:42. I'll just say that.
We're going to talk about expectations first, too. James, I'll start into introductions, expectations. We can talk about logistics in here too.
Yep.
Got it?
All right.
Record still on? Okay, perfect. So as we get started here, we're going to just talk about kind of expectations of the program. I'm sure you read in just on our website kind of the idea of attendance. You know, like anything else, I suppose you only get out what you put in, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for lecture, for interaction. The homework assignments, they're tailored to help prepare you for the next steps. And the first one is probably going to be the most challenging. It's a group experience. Again, James will describe it at the end. But so Mondays 6 to 9 Mountain Time, Thursday evening lecture and process groups 7 to 8 p.m. Required. The peer process group, that shouldn't say required.
No,
that's okay. So so that Thursday evening group, we're going to give you, so the 7 to 8 will give you, you know, kind of 10, 15 minutes break. And then that will pick up at, so 7 to 8:15 to 9:30. And Ken and Sune will be running that like we talked about. They'll talk about kind of their own requirements and how you interact there. One of the things that's so important to us in holding space for one another and you being a tribe is the idea of confidentiality. So a lot of things will be shared by lecturers, by us as, I guess, admins, and then you have that opportunity. Of course, do what you feel is comfortable. You know, some of these are recorded. If you feel like, you know, a personal share where you want to, you know, talk about a certain medicine experience, that is absolutely okay. And it comes with, you know, it should come with the commitment of all members of this community, you know, that it stays here. This is, you know, a community, a tribe. The lectures that we do record will only be available to the students of this group. They won't be available outside, public, or in any other way. So only to this group going forward. Emergencies come up, and so some of the recordings will be available. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 lecturers, that's it, that have said, you know, they don't want the recordings out there, and so we'll honor that for them. Homework assignments, it's pretty important that the specific assignments that you try to get them in on time, because it's pretty easy to get behind. The book readings can be really taxing, and so we don't necessarily, you know, a book a week is much. So do what you can, you know, at least come in skimming the books. Some of the preparation is going to be articles. Jim Fadiman, he asks the students to review his Friday night lecture from the conference. So that is all in a document, a master document that James has created and he'll be curating. That's a living document, so it could change, but just we're trying to make it as palatable as possible. There's a lot of information in that, but hopefully you've gotten it and it makes sense to you. And then, you know, originally we had envisioned doing a clinical internship, say in a ketamine clinic. That is just not something that can be supported. To some degree, we can support it in our clinic, but in lieu of that, so in our clinic, we charge $350 for a ketamine session, 1 session of ketamine in assisted psychotherapy. For students of the program, we do their first session if they want to experience ketamine for $225. And the majority of people in this cohort actually aren't in Salt Lake. And so I apologize, I can't extend that to everybody, but if you happen to be in Salt Lake, or if we can figure that out, that's great. it sounds like a lot of you may be associated with either therapy program or a ketamine clinic in your local areas. I would recommend that, and even ask if you can talk to the doctors or the therapists. We are big advocates of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So there are a lot of ketamines that just drop a person into ketamine and don't support them, and we don't support that. So be careful, and we will be talking about it this next Tuesday. And then at the end, there's a personal experience essay. This is after really, I mean, I guess you could turn it in before, but we assume that it'll either be about your own personal experience, either from the past or the future, or maybe holding space for someone. So it's a couple pages and kind of a final document that you send us. And then we've got, as it clearly states, we're not certifying people to be psychedelic psychotherapists. It's a sort of certificate of education. So if that's something that you want, we just need all the things that I just talked about. And at the end, you can send that to us. Let's see, as a logistical problem, the final process group is actually, instead of Thursday Thanksgiving, it's the Tuesday before, so November 24th. James, other logistic issues?
No, that was the only one that I could think of for the class. The only other thing, and I mentioned it before, but the only thing that we are planning for that is not currently scheduled is an optional night on some Tuesday or Wednesday, probably a month from now, where we can have John and Marie, and they can talk about their church and the ayahuasca retreats, as well as have Dimitri from Decriminalized Salt Lake City. Everything else is all planned and in that document. The document's a little cumbersome. There's a lot happening in that document. So maybe just look at it one day at a time. But we want it to be as transparent as possible about what to expect, dates to expect, time to expect, assignments, readings, things like that.
And also maybe to lessen, I mean, it looks cumbersome, but there's really only 3 Zoom links. There's one for every Monday night, one for every Thursday process, or I guess the 7 to 8 meeting, and then one for the 8:15 to 9:30 meeting. So there's only 3 that you have to, kind of keep handy.
Yeah, every Monday is exactly the same link. Every Thursday, same link. And then every Thursday, group led by Ken will be one link as well. As soon as Ken sends me that information, I will add it to that document. That's the only thing that's not on the document that I can think of right now.
Great.
Okay,
I have a
fantastic.
good question.
Yeah.
What format do you guys want the personal essay to be in?
Format meaning?
Like, do you want MLA, APA?
Oh, I don't even remember what those are anymore. So we're not going to grade on style or any of those other things that you might have gotten hammered for in school. We just want to hear what your experience is.
The most formal assignment will be this first one, and James has given plenty of examples. You will be handheld through it. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, fabulous. Yeah, anybody else?
Sorry, I asked in the chat, would it be okay to add a contact section on the schedule or add another Google Doc so people can put their information in and communicate?
Yeah, I already know. I think it's a great idea. Thank you, Anna.
Okay, sweet.
And I don't know if you've put it on there, but there is a Facebook page specifically for the training program. And so you can communicate, we'll add you in, and that's another way of communicating.
Oh, awesome. Sweet. Thank you.
So the Facebook group, while we're talking about that, I guess I might as well just bring it up. So for me to invite you to our private Facebook group, we wanted it to be a private group. We know that everybody is in a different spot in their psychedelic journey. Some of you have outed yourself to friends. Some of you have outed yourself to family or colleagues. Some of you haven't. And so we wanted the group to be something that felt very private. Not something where, somebody you don't want to see a comment, that's not going to happen. So we set up a Facebook page called PTTP Exploration, Psychedelic Therapy Training Program Exploration. And it is past students from this program, a few guest lecturers, obviously me and Parth, and current people in the current cohort. So that's a way for you to be able to network with prior groups, And it's a way to be able to try to build even more so than the 25 people in this program, building a bigger tribe than that. We had 20 people in the first program, 23 in the second, now 25 in the third. So we've got about 70 people in that group. And so I post a lot there about upcoming conferences, research that's come out, new articles on psychedelics that have come out, general neuroscience. And we'd love to have as much participation as possible. All right.
And then another just logistical, like, please don't be afraid to, grab your meal and be eating during, especially didactics and, like drink. And so, this is a late night training, and we don't want to interfere with that. So please feel free.
Right. And if you feel comfortable, we would prefer you to eat and drink just with your video on instead of turning your video off. There might be other programs you're a part of where that's distracting or a little rude, but we know we're going from 6 to 9. And so we just assume that everyone's going to eat during the lecture. Also on that note, whenever possible, and obviously there's circumstances that you can't always, get by, but whenever possible, have your video feed on, especially when guest lecturers here. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not paying attention, but it has more of a connotation that maybe you're not paying attention than if your face is up on the screen. So just to show respect out of the time, energy, and effort that our guest lecturers are bringing to the table, please try to stay on video and show your support as often as you can, if that makes sense. Any other questions? If not, we're going to start our first lecture. So any last second questions? No? Okay.
Will we receive the slides for the lectures?
Yes, you will. So similar to recordings, if the lecturer is willing to share their PowerPoint and willing to allow us to record them, we always do. I'll distribute all of them. I usually distribute everything Friday mornings. So PowerPoints and recordings of Monday and Thursday will go out on Friday.
Okay, cool. Thanks, James.
Yeah, and especially for, not all the guest lecturers do this. Some guest lecturers, the PowerPoints are more just kind of guiding them through talking points. I try to build my PowerPoints and the PowerPoints for Scepter when I help Parth build his, to have a lot of content in them. So we may not hit on every single slide. We may not hit every point on every single slide, but it's here to be a resource for you. So there's lots of links and lots of information. Just FYI. Okay, so tonight I'll be talking about the overview of psychedelics and how the psychedelic renaissance that took place in the 50s and 60s kind of changed the evolution of science in really exciting ways. Just before I get started, I am outrageously excited about psychedelic history and all things psychedelics. I never would have thought that after going to business school and focusing on business, and I worked about 100 hours a week for 8 straight years, working for banks. And I thought that was just going to be what my life was going to be for the rest of my life. And I would have these, side books that I would read, and I would think about psychedelics and neuroscience, but I never thought it would be part of my life. So I just feel outrageously grateful to be able to be where I am right now, working for this company and being able to share this exciting space with all of you. So here in this first slide, this is a quote from William James. He's known as the father of modern psychology. He was around the turn of the century, about 100 years ago. Really brilliant mind. And I bring up this quote because one of my favorite topics of study is in physics, and particularly in the idea of the theory of everything, which is essentially the physics trying to come up with a overarching single concept, theory, and equation or set of equations that can describe everything. And it's obviously a very something that, Einstein tried to do it, couldn't do it. Lots of scientists have tried to do it and failed. So the theory of everything is very big in the physics world. And I just love this William James quote because he kind of says that no theory of everything could possibly be a theory of everything without considering altered states. And he says one conclusion, this was after his experience, his psychedelic experience on nitrous. Most psychedelics weren't popularized at the time, so he didn't know of any other avenues, but he tried nitrous, and he said this after trying them a few times. One conclusion was forced upon my mind at that time, and my impression of its truth has ever since remained unshaken. It is that our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness. We may go through life without suspecting their existence, but apply the requisite stimulus, and at a touch, they are there in all their completeness. Definite types of mentality which probably somewhere have their field of application adaptation. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded. How to regard them is the question. And that's a quote from one of my favorite books that he read on the varieties of religious experience. All right. So if you don't know yet, I am a book nerd. I read a lot. I love reading. I document all of my reading, which sounds crazy, but I have a 600,000 cell Excel spreadsheet that keeps track of the books and psychedelic experiences that I have to be able to compare data sets and data points. There's probably 200-300 pivot tables that show me all sorts of charts and everything on everything that I'm reading about. So when I talk, it's going to often be about books. I'm passionate about books. So these are my favorite 12 books that I read in preparation to prepare for this lecture on the psychedelic history. All of these books are either entirely geared toward the history of psychedelics, like mescaline, like acid dreams, like the Harvard Psychedelic Club, acid test, and then other ones just have fantastic overviews of the history in parts of the book. Just so that I can, here, I want to see everybody. I want to do a little activity here. How many of you have read, why is this screen so big? How many of you have read one of these books? Okay. And keep your hands up. How many of you have read two of these books? Okay, very good. How many of you have read three? Okay, still got a few. Awesome. 4. Oh, still got a few hanging in here. How about 5? Hannah's seeing if she can count to 5. Give her a sec. How about 6? Anybody? 5 for Hannah, 5 for Parth. Is that Angelique? The names aren't coming up on my screen. Or Angela. Okay. Okay, awesome. Well, that's fantastic. What I have found in my own personal study is the only way to really truly understand a topic is to approach it from lots of different avenues and to read multiple books about it. I think when you first start reading in this sphere, you take every author at their word. And a lot of times there's a lot of, biases that different authors have, or there's different ideas that if you just read one book, you might think, oh, this is kind of set in stone. This is how it works. This is what it is. It's not until you read lots of different books from different authors that you start realizing that everything is just a different point of view. It has less to do with fact and fiction and more to do with points of view. So I advocate greatly reading any one of these books. Okay, so these are, now that I'm lecturing, I'm not looking at any of you. So if you have a question, just feel free to blurt it out and interrupt me. So these are the 7 big psychedelics. Ketamine is psychedelic-ish. It is actually a dissociative anesthetic, but it has psychedelic properties, so we throw it in there as a psychedelic. MDMA is also psychedelic-ish. It's not exactly a psychedelic. It is categorized more as an empathogen or as a, what's the other word for it? Entactogen, because it has to do with sensory touch. But the rest of these are true psychedelics, some synthesized, some coming from plants, some coming from fungi. So on the top left, DMT. DMT was first synthesized in 1931. There's also a slide on each one of these. So I'm just going to go quickly through this, and then we'll dive into each one individually. So DMT was first synthesized in 1931. DMT can be synthesized fully, or it can be extracted from a myriad of different plants. DMT is really kind of everywhere in our world, at least in trace amounts. So it can also be extracted from plant matter and then synthesized into DMT. MDMA was originally synthesized in 1912. The company that did it was Merck, which is a company that still exists today, but they didn't really do anything with it at all, and it kind of fell off the planet. It was resynthesized by Alex Shulgin or Sasha Shulgin in 1978, and it kind of repopularized. Ibogaine is from the plant Iboga and comes from Africa. It was originally isolated in 1901, but nothing was really done with it until 1966, and then shortly thereafter, they started figuring out that it had very strong anti-addiction properties. So Ibogaine is mostly used for anti-addiction. It's also the longest psychedelic trip. Ibogaine trips can last anywhere from 18 hours to 36 hours to 48 hours. So it's you thought you were, really thinking an LSD trip was long, but an Ibogaine trip is very, very long. LSD was first synthesized in 1938 by Albert Hofmann in Switzerland. And we'll get into that pretty deeply in the next hour, talking about LSD. LSD kind of really kicked off the second wave of psychedelics in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Mescaline is known as one of the traditional psychedelics. It was one of the very first ones that was explored and studied. Most stories that people are aware of in the psychedelic histories assume that most of the first experiences of these popularized people in history came on LSD, but most of them actually came on mescaline.
James?
Yeah.
Just as a side note, do you talk later about who was the first person that brought it to Harvard, mescaline?
Maybe. I mean, I can bring it up. I don't know if it's in the PowerPoint, but I'll bring it up. And then psilocybin. Psilocybin is the principal active ingredient in psychedelic mushrooms. It is the psychedelic in psychedelic mushrooms. Psilocybin and psilocin are the two psychoactive components in mushrooms. Most people actually consider psilocybin as the psychedelic, but when your body processes psilocybin, it actually turns it into psilocin. Psilocin is what moves past the blood-brain barrier for you to have a psychedelic experience. So when you're actually experiencing a psilocybin journey, you're actually really experiencing a psilocin journey. And then finally, ketamine. It was synthesized in 1962, and it was synthesized and it was created in it a dissociative anesthetic. So it was the first one that we had ever made, and it really came to help hospitals with surgeries. They had been using PCP, and obviously there are lots of downfalls to PCP, so they developed ketamine to replace PCP and be a more effective anesthetic. All right.
I have two questions, if that's okay.
Of course.
So my first question is, because I haven't read any articles and there's not a lot about MDA in regards to like the therapeutics, because from my experience and my research, MDA is considered a low psychedelic compared to MDMA, has more psychedelic properties. What would you say, and why isn't MDA on this list?
The more you dive into psychedelic chemicals, there's hundreds. And so really, I'm focusing on the biggest ones, the biggest names, and the ones that you need to be most familiar with. So in no way is this covering all psychedelics and psychedelic history. That would not be possible.
Sure.
But
To add to
MDA,
that also, MDMA is what's being studied, through MAPS, and neither MDMA or MDA is a true psychedelic, like James talked about there, and entheogens, and they facilitate a process of feeling, but they're not true psychedelics. So.
Perfect, thank you. And then my second and last question is, you were talking about psilocybin and psilocin, and from my understanding, like you were saying that psilocybin through the process of rapid hydrolysis in the stomach turns into psilocin. So when you said that they're different, I always had the understanding that they were kind of like this, they were the same thing, but the chemical compound is different. So I'm kind of confused when you say that they are different, but they're the same thing.
yeah, kind of. I mean, so in a psychedelic mushroom, there's going to be psilocybin, and there's also going to be psilocin. They are both psychoactive in the way that they function. But psilocybin, when it's ingested, turns into psilocin, and that's what you're actually experiencing. So in a way that they're the same, but they're two different molecules.
Right, and I think part of that is the psilocybin in the body or just in the mushroom degrades into psilocin, which is the active compound. And the additional note to that, and what a lot of the big public companies are studying right now, is they don't think it's just psilocybin and psilocin in the magic mushroom. They think there are other alkaloids. And so we'll talk about that later, but a lot of interesting studies going on in other parts of the magic mushroom.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, and the same works with most of these plant-based psychedelics. The chemical compound that we are using kind of as a proxy. So psilocybin is kind of a proxy for magic mushrooms. Mescaline is a proxy for peyote. They've found in all of these plant medicines that there are other psychoactive compounds that are either working on their own and contributing to the experience, or they are working with the other major psychedelic substances within the plant to enhance or dull certain experiences as well. So that's the case with almost every plant medicine, that we're now discovering that there are more psychoactive components than we originally thought, which is interesting because in our Western science modality, we try to synthesize everything down to its smallest component of action. And the problem now is that, take for instance, Denver. So Denver decriminalized psilocybin. What could end up hurting somebody one day is they get busted with magic mushrooms and they still get tried because there's more stuff that's illegal in mushrooms than just psilocybin. And so we've kind of taken this route of every plant or fungus can be dumbed down into one specific chemical that's inducing these states, and that's just not really the case. So we'll see if that ends up kind of biting us in the butt, that we are taking the approach that we're taking in society and medicine and research. So mescaline is known as one of the classic hallucinogens. All of these drugs I'm hitting in as a timeline. So mescaline is the first, 1897. We know that mescaline is the active principle in San Pedro cactus in South America and peyote cactus in Mexico. The historical uses go back thousands of years. Some I saw in doing the research, some think that they have evidence that it goes back 10,000 years. Some say less, but it's many thousands of years that they've been using the peyote cactus and San Pedro cactus for sacred events. It was in 1897 was the first time that it was isolated by German chemist Arthur Hefter. The Hefter Institute is an organization existing today, one of the biggest psychedelic institutes in the world, and it's named after that German chemist Arthur Hefter. 1918, about 20 years later, it was synthesized for the first time by an Austrian chemist, Ernst Spath. And then in the 1950s, mescaline became popularized. I guess the late 40s and early 50s, it became popularized. Is very similar to LSD. a lot of people report that the main difference between LSD and mescaline is mescaline has a little more uppity feeling, and colors tend to be a little different than on LSD. But LSD and mescaline are often used kind of interchangeably. At least in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, they were mostly used interchangeably during clinical research. But in 1953, and I'll get into Aldous Huxley a little bit later in a separate slide, so I'll just barely hit on it right now. He famously took mescaline in 1953. It was his very first psychedelic experience. He was an author. He had already written a number of books. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature 7 times, and he received mescaline and took it with Humphrey Osmond, who was one of the most famous psychedelic researchers in the 50s. And then he described it in his book, The Doors of Perception. Really, really interesting book, very short book. But one of the reasons they wanted to give it to Aldous Huxley is he had such a command of the language and the way he described things, that they wanted his artistic mind to be able to experience a psychedelic and to try to describe it. You know, an artist sees things very differently and can describe things very differently than a scientist or a doctor. Fantastic book. If you haven't read it, it's a quick read and it's fabulous. In 1969, Richard Nixon spoke to Congress about the problems with drugs in the United States. And what came from that in the following year was the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. And it basically made all psychedelics, basically all drugs that had been discovered to that point, it made them illegal and made almost all of them Schedule 1. Schedule 1 drug, if you're unaware, Schedule 1 drug means there's a high propensity for addiction, which we know psychedelics are actually anti-addictive, so that's clearly not true. And that there are no proven medicinal benefits to the drug, which obviously also are not true. So we're living in a weird time right now where these drugs that in no way fulfill the requirement to be in Schedule 1 are actually in Schedule 1, but starting with Denver last summer, and then followed by Oakland, and then Santa Cruz in California, and now Ann Arbor, some of those walls are starting to be knocked down. And like Liv mentioned, they're voting on it in Oregon in November as a state, and so that's very exciting as well. In 1971, due to pressure from the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, almost all worldwide governments also made all of these drugs illegal. And so from 1971 until the early 1990s with DMT, it was illegal to possess, illegal to use, and even illegal for scientists, researchers, and doctors to study, which seems pretty crazy. But again, those walls are being knocked down now, which is great.
Yeah, can I mention that? And if you read Michael Pollan's book, this is redundant for you, but there's really nothing else in science and medicine that was shut down like psychedelics. For 40 years. There was negative propaganda that just suggested these things are so harmful to you. They were categorized like, cocaine and heroin, and everything was shut down. When I was in graduate school, I still, 20 years ago, it was, there was, LSD, psychedelic flashbacks. And so, all of that research from the 50s and 60s was buried. And under the propaganda of Nixon and, control, because we were going into Vietnam, he wanted to control. He didn't want people thinking. So, but yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll hit on that in a little while as we talk about the societal impacts and things like that. Thank you, Parth. And then in 1978, the Supreme Court here in the U.S. ruled in favor of the Native American tribes' legal right to consume peyote as a sacrament in the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. So that was the first Supreme Court ruling in favor of psychedelic use in traditional shamanic practice. MDMA. So MDMA was originally synthesized by Merck in 1912 and really just sat on it for about 40 years. It wasn't until the 1950s when the US military began doing trials on psychedelics. Sometimes the soldiers knew that what they were being given, and sometimes they didn't. But in 1953 was the first time that humans were actually tested. And then they just sat on all of that research for another 15 or so years. It wasn't even published till 1969. So, Nixon's talk to Congress was in 1969. The legislation was passed in 1970 in the US, and then throughout the world in 1971. MDMA wasn't a part of that timeline because it really hadn't been a part of any type of abuse or popularization whatsoever until 1978. So, a good 66 years passed after it had been discovered, synthesized. And then Alexander Shulgin, his name is, he goes by Sasha Shulgin, and David Nichols. David Nichols was the chemist that synthesized DMT for Rick Strassman. If any of you have read DMT, the Spirit Molecule, or seen the Joe Rogan documentary on Netflix. They synthesized and popularized it in 1978. They never really, clinical applications were never really realized. There were a handful of clinicians that saw some promise, but it never really went anywhere. And then it became a drug of abuse and moved to the recreational scene, first in Europe and then to the United States, and became very closely related to music and raves. If you have experienced MDMA, the way that it makes you feel your body, the way that everything sounds and feels, I think it was probably always destined to become a type of rave drug. But nonetheless, there were lots of concerns of abuse, reports of toxicity in the brain. They were later debugged or debunked. But it kind of all started happening. It started becoming a big drug of choice in the underground, and they didn't want to see MDMA become the new cocaine. Cocaine was huge in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, and they didn't want MDMA to add to that. So they made MDMA a Schedule I drug in the either late 1980s or early 1990s, I don't recall. And then we've recently seen a big uptake in the last 10 years of clinical trials related to MDMA, because MDMA shows a lot of promise, specifically when you're talking about dealing with trauma and dealing with PTSD, because MDMA essentially, well, with PTSD at a dumb level, it's really the connection between the part of your brain that holds emotions and the part of your brain that holds memories. And so if there is a lot of connection between those two areas of the brain because of a specific incident in your life, when you think about that incident, it triggers all of the emotionality that kind of came forth when you first experienced that trauma. And so going through talk therapy often does not help people with PTSD because they can't even allow themselves to think about the event without triggering all of the emotions of that event and sometimes even reliving it. And what MDMA does is it allows you to temporarily sever the connection between your memories and the emotions that you experienced with those memories. And so it's shown a lot of promise. Rick Doblin, the founder and head of MAPS, believes that MDMA will be the first federally legalized psychedelic or psychedelic-ish compound. He thinks it could happen as early as 2021. COVID may be pushing that back a year, but 21 or 22, so that's close. He also believes that psilocybin will be legalized, at least in some shape or form, by 2022 as well. So MDMA and psilocybin are the first two. DMT is probably the wildest ride of all of the psychedelic compounds. It is the active principle in ayahuasca. It can be smoked from a powder or crystallized powder, or it can be orally consumed. If it's orally consumed, you also have to take an MAOI monoamine oxidase inhibitor, because as you drink it, when you smoke it, it's immediately active, passes the blood-brain barrier, and you have a psychedelic experience that comes on in very, very quickly. If you drink it, your body would normally metabolize the psychedelic, so you would have no psychedelic experience whatsoever, no matter how much DMT you consumed. But with the MAOI, it allows those two, the DMT, the plant extract from the DMT, or the synthesis of DMT, mixed with a handful of different South American plants and trees. Typically the one that is used is called Banisteriopsis caapi. When you take those two together, then DMT is active. And there's evidence that ayahuasca has been used in South America for hundreds and hundreds of years, potentially thousands of years. In 1931 was the first time it was synthesized. Similar to mescaline, the first person that synthesized it was German. It was a German chemist, Richard Mansky. 1956, a Hungarian chemist discovered that it actually had hallucinatory properties. 1957, two American chemists discovered that ayahuasca had DMT in it. And then again, because all of this happened prior to 1969, the Reagan years, in 1970, it was also made illegal along with the rest of the psychedelics. But then the early 1990s, like I brought up a minute ago, Dr. Rick Strassman ran the first clinical trials. And that was a big barrier that we broke into reintroducing psychedelic research into American science. And so that was really big. If you haven't watched the documentary, it's beyond fascinating. DMT is the craziest of all the psychedelics, at least in my opinion. And his book is really interesting too. I actually had the chance to talk with him after I read his book, and we talked a little bit about DMT, the spirit molecule, and what DMT is. And anyway, it's a fascinating book. And then in 2006, the Supreme Court, so in 1998, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Native American tribes using mescaline as a sacrament. In 2006, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of UDV, that's União do Vegetal in Portuguese. It's a Brazilian religion that uses ayahuasca as its sacrament. They kind of picked a fight with the Supreme Court, and they had a lot of financial backing, and so they were able to win that case, which was a landmark case. And then in 2008, it wasn't the Supreme Court, but it was I believe it was a district court that ruled the same for Santo Daime, which is another Brazilian church. Both the UDV and Santo Daime have branches here in the United States, and they are allowed to use ayahuasca as their sacrament. That is also, just as a little side note, we're going to talk with John and Marie in a few weeks about underground journeys. What a lot of these people that are setting up Native American churches in order to be able to use psychedelics, the precedent is there. And so it's not black and white that they're doing something illegal. It's kind of more in the gray, because the United States runs on legal precedent in our political system. And so legal precedent has shown that if you are a religion and using this as sacrament, the Supreme Court has already ruled that you're allowed to do that. Yet at the same time, the Supreme Court specifically ruled in favor of UDV and Santo Daime. So that brings it back to being in the gray, because it's not exactly illegal. It's not exactly not illegal. And we'll have the chance to talk with John and Marie about that later. They can talk about what they did to try to be as in the white as possible, or light gray as possible. LSD, I'm not going to hit too much on this slide, because I mostly talk about everything else in this, but this is just for your benefit for having a timeline of LSD. Albert Hofmann graduated in 1929 and went and got a job with Sandoz Pharmaceuticals. In 1938, 7 years later, he discovered LSD, but didn't realize what he had discovered, and he put it on the shelf along with all of the other synthesized compounds that he had created. And 5 years later, he finally had an LSD experience, and the world was forever changed after that. I did want to mention that in the 1950s, most people don't realize this, but when LSD in particular was made illegal in 1970, LSD actually there were thousands and thousands of clinical trials and papers and articles written about psychedelics from a scientific perspective. I'm not talking about Timothy Leary and changing mass culture and politics and everything like that. I just mean from a scientific perspective. Just in the 50s alone, over 1,000 scientific papers were written on LSD. LSD was the most used psychiatric drug for decades, and then it all disappeared in 1970. Between the 40s and 70s, 40,000 plus patients were treated with LSD-assisted psychotherapy. I'll talk more about that later. And then in 1965, 5 years before Congress actually passed the Controlled Substances Act, Sandoz was getting enough pressure from the US government because of the problems that were coming forth that they decided to stop producing LSD. They produced it from 1943 to 1965. It was made illegal. And then just a couple fun stats that are really interesting. From 2015 to 2018, adult use of LSD increased by 56%, which just really shows how this movement is really pushing forward with people trying substances and having experiences that make them reevaluate their lives and want to better their lives. And then I read an article just a few months ago that showed research that since COVID-19 happened in March, that LSD adult use has tripled. So that's also something to think about, something that's very interesting.
I have a question.
Sure.
Maybe this could be for all of them or just very specific points. But I personally would love to have the reference to the articles and the references in the stats in regarding to these statistics, because that would be awesome to see and read.
Sure. I don't know if I'm sure I could find those. Let me write that down real quick.
Thank you.
Okay, got it. Okay, that takes us to psilocybin. So psilocybin and psilocin, the active principles in many psychedelic mushrooms. Native American use has occurred for many thousands of years, particularly in Mexico. It has a really interesting story. In 1953, Gordon Wasson, who was a vice president at JP Morgan, an investment bank in New York City, he and his wife Valentina came up with this idea that there had been sacred mushroom use throughout Latin America that had led to these fantastic visions that shamans and practitioners talk about, and that had been something that was important. There was a very important use for that across thousands of years. So in 1953, they started going to Mexico for weeks at a time, trying to research and trying to find this magic mushroom. At the time, the native Indians in Mexico were not allowed to share these practices at all with any what they called aliens or white-skinned Westerners. And so they were there from 1953 to 55, or often there from 53 to 55, trying to find a way to know if their hypothesis was true and if there was actual, psychedelic experiences coming from these mushrooms, now that LSD had been synthesized about 10 years prior. And finally, in 1955, Gordon and Wasson were invited into the home of Maria Sabina, who was a big name in the psychedelic histories. She was a medicine woman or shaman in northern Mexico, and invited them into having the first non-native experience on psychedelic mushrooms. They had lots of mushrooms that night, and so Valentina and Gordon had a full psychedelic experience. Their minds were blown. They felt like the 2 years of research that they had been doing, they had finally, they were finally on those first steps of proving that it had a very important and sacred use for hundreds or thousands of years. And actually in 1955, Gordon sent those same mushrooms to Albert Hofmann in Switzerland, and Albert Hofmann was able to isolate psilocybin and psilocin, and he was actually the one that named those two what they are today. So Albert Hofmann actually plays a critical role in psilocybin as well as LSD, which most people don't know, just associate him with LSD. In 1960, the Harvard Psilocybin Project, created by Leary, Metzner, and Alpert, was started. I'll talk more about that later. In 1970s, we've discussed before, everything was made illegal. And now in the 2000s, clinical trials are finally resuming after over 30 years of a drought. So that's
I think it's important to add also that part of the reason that MDMA and psilocybin are moving so quickly under MAPS guidance, under so many things, is because the FDA in America have fast-tracked these medicines. You may have heard that, so they literally have received fast-track approval. And so they're now both in phase 3 clinical trials, which means that really they're just working on dosing. And what's the therapy modality? Like, they know it's safe, and they're moving very quickly. And so yeah, MDMA next year, psilocybin the year after. It's moving very quickly.
Yeah, it really is moving quickly. Another reason for it is both of those experiences are more usable within a therapeutic modality because they're shorter. Psilocybin experience typically lasts 3 to 5 hours. It can be a little longer if you eat a lot, but 3 to 5 hours is typical. And then MDMA is about the same, like 2 to 4 hours. You can use those drugs in clinical settings and it's not too overwhelming. With LSD, if you were to hire a psychiatrist and a doctor to watch over a single 12-hour LSD session, that's just not very, with the way that they're trying to legalize these as being drugs used by psychiatrists, doing clinical trials on LSD and fast tracking that would be incredibly difficult because it's just not as useful in a therapeutic setting because of the duration of the experience. So psilocybin and MDMA are definitely helped in that the experiences are shorter, but not too short. A DMT experience usually lasts about 10 minutes. So
And even that said, I think psilocybin, there's more leeway in terms of how the assisted psychotherapy is being developed, but the MAPS is controlling the MDMA assisted psychotherapy, and their standard protocol would still cost $15,000 to $18,000 per patient, and it's not, for the most part, it's not tenable, and so it's gonna have to evolve.
Yeah. But at least we're going through those early stages, and we're not in this drought period of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. So things are happening. And then ketamine is the final one that I talk about, 1962. It was synthesized by an American chemist. And as I mentioned earlier, it was to replace PCP for emergency rooms and hospitals to be able to be used as an anesthetic. It's a dissociative anesthetic. That was their main use. Later on in the history, some psychiatrists like John C. Lilly, Stanislav Grof, found that there was a therapeutic value if the dosage was brought down. If you didn't fully disassociate, if you didn't fully go into that space, but it was toned down at a lower dose, that you could actually have what is typically experienced as a psychedelic experience. Every drug is slightly different in what the experience feels like, but if you have experienced multiple types of these drugs, they all have a different feel to them, even if it's apparently obvious that you're having a psychedelic experience. In 2013, the FDA designated CAP, or ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which is what we practice at Scepter Wellness, as a breakthrough therapy. It's been fast-tracked, like Parth said, by the FDA 2 or 3 times, actually, in the last I think ketamine, psilocybin, and MDMA. And then in 2019, they actually approved ketamine nasal spray as an antidepressant, and it is typically seen by the FDA as the only anti-suicide prevention medication in the United States. Ketamine is very fast acting, it happens very quickly, and so the suicidal ideation and the loops that the mind goes through in that mindset can be turned off within a matter of minutes for most people who use the ketamine nasal spray. So that's very exciting as well.
What's interesting about that, just as a real quick side note, is it doesn't necessarily affect the depression. The depression level stays the same, but the suicidal feelings resolve almost immediately. And so it's the only FDA-approved anti-suicide prevention medicine in the ER.
Yeah, which is really, really exciting. We've never had anything that was anti-suicide prevention. That ideation is just going so wild in your brain, it's hard to turn off. It's hard to turn off if you're with a therapist. It's hard to turn off if you're with loved ones. So we've never really had an effective measure against suicide in those very early moments of the ideation until just last year with the ketamine nasal spray. So that's very exciting.
Casey's going to talk about this at length next Monday, but if you're interested in the quick neuroscience, it's because it shuts off the default mode network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of resets the brain. And then the final one, ibogaine. This is one of the big 7 that is most people don't know about. Ibogaine comes from the iboga root and is used for medicinal and ritual purposes in African spiritual traditions, particularly from the Bwiti religion in Gabon. This psychedelic experience lasts for a very long time, and reports of ibogaine often come back similar regardless of your societal, religious, geographic background, as a drug that allows you to interact with ancestors in some type of afterlife. We don't know a lot of what it is, or if that's what's really happening, if that's really what's happening, how is it possible? There's a lot more research that needs to happen. Also, this spiritual tradition by the Bwiti is known as a closed tradition. They do not share their spiritual insights and about the sacred sacrament at all with outsiders. So maybe one day we'll have Gordon Wasson, who met Maria Sabina. Maybe we'll have that same happen with ibogaine, and we'll be able to learn a lot more. It was first isolated over 100 years ago, and then accidentally it started being promoted as an anti-addiction treatment. It was from a group of people in New York City that were, it was a group of friends. They were all addicted to heroin. And as they were starting to use other drugs, they started collectively noticing that their withdrawals and the negatives coming from the addiction from heroin were greatly diminished shortly after an ibogaine journey. And so they kept experimenting with it, and they were all cured from their addictions of heroin, and it became a big anti-addiction treatment. It's still mostly known for anti-addiction treatments, at least in the West, in their non-sacred ceremonial setting. In the 1990s, the National Institute on Drug Abuse funded and conducted animal trials with ibogaine in the U.S., again, opening up the psychedelic research, which was exciting. In 1993, the FDA approved human clinical trials using ibogaine. So anyway, just one to be aware of. It is not very common to find ibogaine in the United States, and actually the iboga root is either endangered or nearly endangered, and I believe it only grows in that region of Gabon. And so access is greatly restricted, especially if you're not in that area of Africa.
I should add, from the Austin conference, Rick Dublin did announce that they were going to study iboga in the next couple of years in a big way.
Oh, that's exciting. Okay, so that's the history of all of the drugs one by one through time. I'm mostly going to talk now about Albert Hofmann and LSD. We're running a little short on time, so I won't hit every slide, but you'll have it to be able to reference after the fact. Okay, so in 1929, Albert Hofmann graduated from the University of Zurich and got a job with Sandoz Pharmaceuticals. And in 1929, he wanted to join the team that was taking medicinal plants, so plants that have been used throughout history medicinally, and he wanted to do extractions and create synthesized versions of some of the compounds in those medicines to see if he could isolate the particular molecule that was contributing to the medicinal benefits of these plants that had been known for hundreds or thousands of years of their medicinal use. So in 1938, he was working with ergot alkaloids. Ergot is a fungus that grows on wheat and other grains like barley. And he was really looking for something that would help with circulatory and respiratory system. And as he was creating these different synthesized versions of what he hoped was the main alkaloid, he had created 24. They give them to mice to see if anything interesting happens. And if nothing interesting happens, it was actually Sandoz Pharmaceuticals protocol that, because there are so many different ways or so many different compounds and molecules to discover and test, that once you discovered and tested one and you didn't see any interesting results from the lab mice, that you had to shelve that chemical and basically throw it in the trash and never look at it again and move on to the next one. So in 1938, he discovered LSD 25, because it was his 25th version of lysergic acid. But he didn't know what he had, and he shelved it. And it probably should have stayed shelved forever, as that was the protocol. But in 1943, and I'll quote him, he says, even after 5 years, and yet I could not forget the relatively uninteresting LSD 25. A peculiar presentiment, the feeling that this substance could possess properties other than those established in the first investigation, induced me 4 years after the first synthesis to produce LSD 25 once again. This was quite unusual. Experimental substances, as a rule, were definitely stricken from the research program if once found to be lacking in pharmacological interest. And so he says that he had synthesized, he said, probably thousands of molecules, and he had never, in all of his years at Sandoz, he had already been there for 10 years, more than 10 years. He had never gone back and looked at one prior, but he just had this grokking recognition for whatever reason that he needed to go back and look at LSD 25. He resynthesized LSD 25 on April 16th in 1943, 5 years after he'd originally discovered it. And shortly thereafter, he says, quote, I was interrupted in my work by unusual sensations and sank into a not unpleasant, intoxicated-like condition. In a dreamlike state, with eyes closed, I perceived an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures, extraordinary shapes with intense kaleidoscopic play of colors. LSD works at a level that no other psychedelic does. It works in micrograms, not milligrams, not grams, micrograms. And so he wasn't entirely sure how it could be possible that he was having this altered state, because he had been very, very, very careful with, putting on the gloves and staying very safe and making sure that none of the LSD actually got on him. And so he wasn't sure if the experience that he had, which actually reminded him of some altered state experiences he had in nature as a child. He wasn't sure if it was because of the LSD 25 or if that was just a coincidence. And so actually 3 days later, he came into the office and told his researchers that reported to him and told his boss, I'm going to self-administer LSD 25 here at work, and I want to see if it actually has these psychological ramifications. He decided to give himself what he considered the smallest possible dose that could ever emit some type of psychedelic experience. And about 45 minutes after taking 250 micrograms, which again, he thought would be the very smallest amount you could possibly take. Nowadays, we typically think of a full psychedelic experience dose of LSD as 100 micrograms. He basically took 3 tablets of LSD without having any idea what was about to happen. So after about 45 minutes, he had to tell his boss and his coworkers, something really crazy is happening right now. I can't be here right now. I need to go home. Because it was during wartime, they couldn't drive home because gasoline was being used in the war effort. So everyone was riding bikes. And he took what is now known as, the most famous bike ride in world history on April 19th, 1943. Every April 19th is known as Bicycle Day, where we celebrate the history of psychedelics and really the history of the origins of modern day psychedelia, which came through Albert Hofmann. He didn't really know what he had. He knew that he had a very powerful experience, and some of it was terrifying and some of it was beautiful, but he didn't really know what it was. And so what Sandoz actually did was from 1949 to 1966, they promised to provide unlimited and free Delicid. Delicid was LSD's brand name for Sandoz initially. They would give an unlimited amount at free of charge to any researcher in the entire world who was willing to do experiments and write up the results and share them with Sandoz. So they basically said, we have something, we don't really know what it is, we'll give you as much as you want as long as you do experiments with it so that we can figure out how we can actually use this. So most all of the LSD until 1966, they stopped producing in 1965. They still had stockpiles they sold through to 1966, but almost all of the world's LSD between 1949 and 1966 all came from Albert Hofmann's Sandoz office in Switzerland. I'm going to push through most of this. Humphrey Osmond, he's the one that introduced, he was one of the greatest research in psychedelics in the 1950s. He established a facility in Saskatchewan, Canada. Canada allowed him to provide LSD-assisted psychotherapy. He became friends with Bill Wilson, who was the co-founder of AA. Bill Wilson had been an alcoholic and had been able to overcome his addiction through a really powerful mystical experience he had on belladonna, which is another psychedelic. And he wanted to add LSD to the top of the AA list because he thought that mystical experience that you go through resets your brain and allows you to be able to get over addictions in a very powerful way. And actually, he worked with Osmond, and in their Saskatchewan hospital, they provided LSD-assisted psychotherapy for people in AA. Bill Wilson, even before it became illegal, they had actually dosed thousands of people on LSD as part of AA. So it's disappointing that had to fall away. I think alcohol abuse is rated as the #1 most harmful addiction in the world because alcohol is so prevalent, it's so addicting. It's sad to see that because of political and social reasons that something like LSD was made illegal, and all of these people dealing with AA no longer had that avenue for increased success, which is sad.
It's also interesting to note that so World Health Organization every 2 or 3, 4 years they publish a big thing on the most or least destructive chemicals, elements. Alcohol is the most and LSD is the least. I think in
Yeah.
contrast, is really, LSD is less toxic than sugar because it's taken in such small increments and works like a lock and key in the serotonin system.
Yeah. Yeah, it was actually LSD that kind of spurred neurochemistry. The entire field of neurochemistry kind of came alive because of LSD and mescaline. At the time, the overarching idea of how the brain worked, that the brain really, it didn't have to do with chemistry. And so when all of a sudden mescaline, which looks like adrenaline, which is a major neurotransmitter, and LSD has the same kind of three-dimensional key, similar to serotonin, it made researchers think, oh, if these tiny, tiny, tiny chemicals are making such a massive impact on the ingester of those chemicals, then maybe there's a chemical component to how our brains work. And that was really the beginning of neurochemistry, neurobiology, which is really interesting. Aldous Huxley, I talked about him a little bit. I'm going to skip past him. Well, so let me just say, when did I get to here? So when psychedelics were first introduced to the world, they weren't called psychedelics, they were called psychotomimetics. What Sandoz thought they had initially and what kind of spread was that take this drug, if you are a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, whatever it might be, and you're going to be able to experience what your clients that have schizophrenia or delusional states, you're actually going to be able to understand them for the first time because you can actually experience this yourself. So psychotomimetic or mind drug mimicking psychosis, that was the overarching paradigm of what these drugs were for a very long time. It was until 1953 when Aldous Huxley tried mescaline for the first time. That had been the paradigm until 1953. When he took mescaline for the first time, he was immediately appalled with the idea that the beautiful spiritual experience that he had, almost he calls it a beatific vision, what the sages had experienced for thousands of years, but it hadn't been an experience that was really accessible to the masses. He immediately thought, no, we're thinking of this wrong. This is not, the overarching idea behind a psychedelic experience is not that it mimics psychosis. It's more than that. And so he actually worked with Humphrey Osmond, who was the researcher and clinician from Canada, and they wanted to figure out a new and more appropriate name for this drug. And he went back and forth with Osmond after his psychedelic experience, and actually the two of them coined the word psychedelic. Huxley had originally proposed that they not be called psychotomimetics, that they be called, that it's phanerothym, and that was Greek for spirit and manifesting. Aldous Huxley was big into Eastern traditions, so he liked the idea of manifesting spirit. And he says, to make this mundane world supply just a 0.5 gram of phanerothym. Osmond responded back, and in his own words, he was a little concerned that by renaming it from psychotomimetic to phanerothym, that there was maybe too much religiosity or spirituality that would be connected to that new word, and he wanted it to be a little more science focused. And so he came up with psychedelic, from Greek mind and manifesting. And his little rhyme back to Huxley in a letter was, to fall in hell or soar angelic, you'll need a pinch of psychedelic. And so after that happened, we kind of went to this new concept of, rather than being psychotomimetic, that it makes you kind of go crazy temporarily, to psychedelic, which was mind manifesting, or psycholytic, which is mind loosening. And then even more recent than that, there have been efforts to move away from psychedelic because it has a lot of negative connotations in our society because of the hippie movement and the Nixon era and everything. And they've tried to move to entheogen. And two of the biggest players in psychedelics, Gordon Wasson and Richard Evans Schultes were the ones at the end of the 70s that tried to introduce this new word. I think psychedelic is still probably the most common word, but entheogen and a lot of other words with more an updated sense of what psychedelics really do are pretty common now.
Just to add a second, go back one. Yeah, sorry. So psychedelic, psycholytic. So in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, we play in both of those, depending on the patient, depending on the type of treatment. We may put a person in a full psychedelic experience with ketamine, or a low dose, we just create psycholytics, and we'll talk about that next week.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, there are two very different ways of using psychedelics in therapy. Psycholytic is low dose. That's typically considered like 25 micrograms of LSD, which is about a quarter of a normal dose, and you're talking through it. So you're feeling the effects of the psychedelic without them really taking hold of you and journeying. And then the psychedelics assisted psychotherapy typically means that you allow somebody to have a full psychedelic experience with a big dose, and then allow them to think about that for 24 hours, and then start having integration therapy sessions with them as the assisted psychotherapy starting that next day. Since we are running short on time, we won't get to that. You should look at this though. A lot of what happened in the psychedelic world in the 50s to the 70s was really hurt by what the CIA was working on. The CIA was established in 1947 because of fears of the Cold War with Russia. And they were kind of given permission to do things that were outside of the scope of any other agency that had ever been created. They didn't really report to Congress, didn't really report to the president. They were just their own thing. And because they had, been granted these permissions, they did a lot of really crazy things, including MK Ultra, which was their project for about 20 years, where they were studying psychedelics. They gave psychedelics to people that were at parties and did not know. Actually, most of the horror stories that came from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s related to psychedelics that were later used as propaganda for the Nixon administration were actually outcomes of CIA trials, people jumping out of windows. Those stories, while they didn't happen very often, they did happen, and they mostly happened to military civilians that were unaware that they had been given a psychedelic. I mean, I'm sure all of you who have had a psychedelic experience, you can only imagine the horror of experiencing a psychedelic experience without knowing that you took a psychedelic and without knowing what a psychedelic even is. So there was a lot of human rights abuses that took place during those years. And then this book, Acid Dreams, is probably my favorite book I've ever read on MK Ultra, the CIA. And, for a while it was a conspiracy theory that MK Ultra wasn't real. But even just here in the 2000s, we've uncovered many documents that have since been declassified. So now they're accessible to the public. We can actually read about these projects that the CIA was doing. Let's see. This is for your resource. So up in the top left-hand corner there's a link. This is the most exhaustive timeline of psychedelics that I have ever seen. I tried to incorporate it in a few slides, and it was just, I don't even know how long it is, but it is very exhaustive, and it touches on everything. So I'd encourage all of you to check that out after class. And I'll just end on this. This is a famous quote from Stan Grof, and it really resonates with me. Psychedelics are the study of the mind what the microscope is to biology and the telescope is to astronomy. So that is an abbreviated version of psychedelic history. I wish I could have covered some other topics. Didn't get to Ram Dass, Timothy Leary, and Richard Alpert. Most people actually think that the beginning of the psychedelic space was started with these guys in the 1960s, but really they were kind of the beginning of the end. The 1950s were full of thousands of studies when particularly Timothy Leary, he created the Harvard Psilocybin Project and got Richard Alpert, who's also known as Ram Dass, and Ralph Metzner to join him. They did a handful of really cool studies, experiments. The Concord Prison Experiment we should check out. The most famous is the Good Friday Experiment. They gave 20 students, 10 of them psilocybin, 10 of them niacin, and they were all divinity students at Harvard, and had them listen in on or actually took them to the chapel and had them listen to boy, now I'm only thinking Latin American terms.
The organ.
The organ. Okay, yeah, sure. But had them listen to a talk. I don't even know the words right now. And many years later, they continued to interview these people that were part of this experience, and many of them described it as the single most powerful experience of their entire life, taking mushrooms and going to church. Which was very profound, very interesting. There was a lot of very famous people that came out of that student body or were assistants to Timothy Leary, like Houston Smith. And then one of the outcomes that came was Timothy Leary, kind of pushed back on modern day protocols in science, and basically came out and said, when you're talking about psychedelics, the idea of a double-blind experiment is a joke. And his quote is, after 5 minutes, no one is fooling anyone. But anyway, that is psychedelic history. If any of you have questions, I would be happy to take them in an email after. Maybe we could do a Q&A for just a couple minutes right now, and then we'll close it down. We really do try to be respectful of your time, so we'll try not to stay very long. But does anybody have any
James.
quick questions? Oh, sure, Parker.
Yeah, so I actually think we should, this is, for James and I both, this is maybe the most fun history, because these guys were crazy and silly and doing really interesting, funny stuff. And so I think we take 5 minutes on history on Thursday. We also, we might take 5 or 10 minutes on the psychedelic space as it is currently, which I was supposed to present along with neuroscience. We really jam-packed this night. I don't think we should do questions because you need to cover the assignment.
Oh, okay, fair enough. So let me get back to this. So tonight, well, probably tomorrow morning, I'm going to take all 25 of you and put you in groups. I'm going to try to diversify your groups between male and female, and people that have a clinical background and people that don't, so that every group has the opportunity to put forth a good assignment and be able to come at it from different angles. Basically what you're going to do is we want you to think through, and this is supposed to be fun. There's going to be some feedback that we're going to give you after the rough draft that you're going to turn in next Monday. But this is really just a thought experiment to get you thinking about what's interesting in this space. And if you could do a clinical trial on anything, what would it be and how would you set it up? This doesn't have to be for people that, like Karen, who are actually in research. Everybody can do this. It's a fun assignment. And we just want you thinking through it. Think about what the research that is out there currently and what are some areas that you specifically think would be really interesting. It could be something like during COVID, what are the levels of marital satisfaction for couples that have both experienced psychedelics or experienced psychedelics together, and those that haven't? Or it could be anything. So just think about what interests you. What do you like about this space, or what would you like to see in research? And put together a protocol. It's 2 to 4 pages. Try not to make it longer than that. I'm sure you're not going to set out to make it longer than that, but it can go a little long. So 2 to 4 pages. These are examples or studies right here. These are all live links for you to check out some examples. And then I'll also be sending out a rubric that we created of things of best practices when you're creating a protocol. So you need to describe what are the type of people that are going to be in as part of the research. So I have this protocol, so make sure that you're knocking off all of those checklists. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to assist. But again, really the project is for you to get your creative juices going and think about what you're interested in.
Yeah.
So are there...
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine, Parth.
Yeah, it's a thought experiment. We want you to have fun. And it's also a way to get to know your peers. So in your small group. So
yeah, so I'll send those groups out. I'll send those groups out tomorrow morning to give you as much time to touch base with your fellow group members to see when you could get on a Zoom for an hour and just talk through some things. And just kind of moving in next steps, divvying up the assignment. What I would suggest is before you get on that Zoom with your cohort, before you get on that Zoom, already be thinking about things that are interesting that you want to bring to the table. It shouldn't just be a brainstorm when you get on that Zoom. You should come a little bit prepared, at least with some ideas of what interests you. That way you can discuss what interests everybody and try to come up with one single plan to move forward with. Are there any questions just on this assignment, just in general, that I could hit on right now?
Quick one.
Sure.
If the people that are assigned, is there going to be a contact that how do we get in touch? Is there like a contact list or something?
Yeah. So I'm going to email the phone number, email, and name of everyone that is in your little group, and I'll do that tomorrow morning. So everybody will have contact information for everybody else in your particular group. I can also add I think as Emma asked earlier, I can add contact information for everybody. I'll do that elsewhere. So in the email tomorrow, it'll be the people that are in your group, and just try to set something up sooner than later, because that Zoom should be an ideation Zoom call and kind of coming up with next steps. So I'll try to do that earlier than later. So next Monday, you are going to, each group is going to have one representative. And at the very beginning of class, that representative is going to talk for literally 2 minutes. This isn't really anything you have to, really prepare for or be stressed about. Just for 2 minutes, talk about why you decided to do the study that you're doing. And that's really it. So it's just very quick, oral. You don't have to show anything. And we'll give some candid, quick feedback then. And then we'll give you more feedback when we actually read through your rough drafts. Any other questions?
I just have one random question. Is the Intermountain Psychedelic Symposium, is that going to be in person or distance? Do you guys know yet?
I can tell you that. So we're shifting. We don't really want to compete with all the online stuff. What we're planning on right now is doing a webinar series with a lot of high-level clinicians and people that are in the field, but not speaking to their research, but speaking to their personal experience. So it'll be like, we're going to name it Psychedelic Stories, I think. And so that's still in the planning phase, but we are doing the same kind of conference we did last year.
Yeah, so we were very bummed about that, but COVID just doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. And it's just too much of a risk to put all the money down for hotels and everything that we did last year, knowing that it could get canceled, and it's going to be the middle of winter. So unfortunately, we're just gonna have to skip it this year, but I'm really excited about the podcast and the psychedelic stories. I love hearing stories from people that are in this space. We hear about a lot of the science, but we want to get personal. We want to be unique. We want to do something innovative that nobody else is doing. And so maybe it'll be a kind of a blessing in disguise that we can't do the conference this year.
All right.
All right. Anybody else? Or we'll cut you loose.
You guys are amazing. Thanks for holding space for one another, and we'll see you Thursday night.
We're very excited. Email me with any questions you have.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone. Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.